Charlotte's harsh words saddened me deeply. We may not get along, but we're family after all. How could she say something so heartless? I felt lost. Thomas grinned and said, "Well, that went as planned. Mission accomplished." At that moment, I had no idea the chaos that was about to unfold. My name is Violet. I met my husband Thomas at work. I work in the office of a shipping company while Thomas is a truck driver. My first impression was that he's a robust guy, both physically and in personality. He's good at his job and kind to his colleagues. However, he wasn't so adept at the romantic game. Whether it was making a move or proposing, he was like a pitcher who only threw fastballs, no change-ups. But I prefer a straightforward man over a guy who thinks he's a playboy. As our relationship progressed and tensions eased, I found him quite interesting. Above all, he gave me a sense of security that I could rely on him. We got married and were blessed with 2 children. Our son and daughter have moved out and live on their own now. Thomas and I live in a large house. Mom passed away 5 years ago due to illness. Thomas and I still work together at the same shipping company. Thomas has been promoted to a supervisor and now handles dispatching. We had a happy marriage, but one worry was my brother Jason. That is soft on Jason. Jason has been dreaming of becoming a rock singer since he was a teenager. He's still chasing his dream, pompadour and all, no matter his age. I won't discourage anyone from following their dreams. However, when he runs out of money, he comes to borrow from Dad. Dad, being soft, lends him the money. Dad lending money is fine. But has he ever paid you back, Violet? When you lend money, you should do it with the intention of giving. That means you shouldn't expect it back. Remember that? But Jason thinks he'll somehow make it. He's underestimating life's challenges. Isn't that risky? When I was young, I dreamed of becoming a novelist, Dad said. But Victoria's parents said if I was going to marry her, I needed a stable job. So I gave up my dream and chose to marry. I don't regret getting married, but I do regret giving up my dream. That was the first time I'd ever heard about my dad's younger days. So that's why I want to support Jason's dreams, I said. But it doesn't seem like Jason's putting in much effort. Do you really think he can achieve his dreams while goofing off all day? Thomas asked. Mountain climbing isn't just about conquering the peak. Every step you take along the way, it's part of the story. Well, you sound like a poet. Makes sense, since you wanted to be a novelist. Come on, you're making me blush with such direct praise. I'm not praising you, Thomas chuckled. Initially, I was worried that Jason had some dirt on Dad and was blackmailing him, but it turns out Dad also chases dreams, so he probably understands Jason's desire to escape reality. One day, Jason brought a woman home. Let me introduce you, this is Charlotte. From her name, I expected a dainty woman. She was, well, big. Hi, I'm Charlotte. I'm Violet, the sister. Nice to meet you, Charlotte. Charlotte is 5 years younger than me but much larger in build. Our first impression of her wasn't great. She was curt to both me and Dad, leaving us with the impression that she had poor manners. Eventually, Jason and Charlotte got married, so she became my younger sister-in-law. Neither Jason nor Charlotte held full-time jobs. They were always quitting their part-time jobs in a huff. Charlotte practices jiu-jitsu and has a short temper, often bragging about putting her arrogant bosses or seniors in joint locks. I just hope she never gets arrested for it. Jason brags about stories that aren't really brag-worthy, like headbutting a disrespectful boss. 2 kinds of stories I really can't stand. Bragging about bad behavior in the past and bragging about fights. I think many women also find these kinds of bragging a turnoff. One day, Jason came home to borrow money from Dad again, and I finally spoke up. Jason, you're working, right? Why don't you have any money? I got into an argument with a plant manager just because I forgot to put away a card. Jason replied. I told him it was workplace harassment. He yelled again, so I gave him a flying knee kick to the chair. Charlotte chimed in, seemingly pleased. I decided that if Dad wouldn't say it, I would. Every workplace has people you won't get along with, but you know, even people I initially disliked turned out to be decent later on. I've often been glad I didn't pick a fight. You and I lead different lives. My pride is taller than the One World Trade Center, so yelling at me is practically asking for a flying knee, Jason continued. I couldn't believe my ears when Charlotte cut in. Are you siding with a boss who harasses people? That's not what I'm saying. So you're lecturing me now? You better be ready for this, Jason replied. Ready to take this outside or here's fine too, Charlotte challenged. I was flabbergasted. What is she, a teenager? Feeling threatened. I walked away, unable to believe she was actually picking a fight. Jason didn't intervene. Would he have stopped if it were his wife fighting his sister? Getting hurt would be the last straw. I knew I had to watch out for that couple. When I turned 50, Dad got sick and was hospitalized. It wasn't long before we had to say goodbye. People said he lived a long life at 80, but I didn't feel that way. I still wanted to talk about many things with Dad. When Thomas and I were alone, he said, "Violet, actually, Lawrence." "What?" "Never mind. Just tell me later." Before much time had passed since the funeral, Charlotte approached me. "Did Lawrence leave a will?" "A will? Probably not. He was hospitalized so suddenly. And if there's no will, then the inheritance." "You're already talking about inheritance. I guess you're not even sad." "How dare you? Want me to put you in the hospital? Try me." I raised my voice. Charlotte grabbed my arm in anger. I was taken aback but didn't want to apologize. "Should we call the police?" "What are you doing? You made me sound like a monster for bringing up the inheritance, so I thought I'd teach you a life lesson with an arm lock." "You're the one who's wrong, Violet. Enough. Don't yell. What are we going to do about the inheritance?" I was momentarily speechless, but then I glared at Jason. "Aren't you sad that Dad passed away?" I asked. "That's irrelevant. Stop calling me stupid. I don't want to be called stupid by someone as stupid as you," Jason retorted sharply. "What did you just say?" The atmosphere grew tense until Thomas arrived. "What's going on here?" Thomas asked. "Wife, you better tell your husband to raise the kids right," Jason snapped. Those words crossed the line. "I'll pass that message right along to Jason," I replied, irritated. "Good on you. I'm fed up with you, Violet. This makes my decision easier," Jason declared, dropping a bombshell. "I'm the eldest son. That means the house and Dad's inheritance are all mine." "Are you out of your mind?" I exclaimed. "I'm perfectly sane," Jason said stone-facedly. Just as we were stunned by his audacity, Thomas spoke up. "Violet, let's try to keep a cool head. We're not making any progress." "Fine," I said, frustrated. We sat down at the table to hash it out. "The inheritance is all mine and Charlotte's." "Violet, I want you to give up your claim," Jason insisted. "That's ridiculous. Our dad isn't rich. If we split it between two households, there won't be much left," I argued. "There's only two of Dad's children, me and Jason, so it should be divided between us," Charlotte chimed in. But Jason scowled. "Look, Violet, you and Thomas both have jobs and are doing fine. I'm the one pursuing my dreams, so I'm the one who needs the money." "Why don't you get a job, Jason?" I retorted. "Let me finish. Living in the house means no rent, and with the inheritance, I can take on the world. Dad was cheering for me, you know. The best way to honor him is to play Carnegie Hall." "You can't even pack the local park," Phil interjected. "What if I do, Phil? Carnegie Hall. Will you put your money where your mouth is?" Jason challenged. "What are you talking about?" I seriously considered calling the police. I interjected. "Thomas, what do you say? Can you give in?" Jason turned to my husband. "I cannot," Thomas replied calmly. Jason then asked, "So you're asking Violet to relinquish her claim?" "Yes, and you're okay with that, Jason?" I responded, incredulous. "What are you talking about?" "Of course it's not okay," Jason said. At that point, Charlotte glared at me. "Shut up. You've been yapping like a puppy this whole time. Such words should not be tolerated." I glared back at her, incensed. "Is it cute to yap like a puppy only until you're in your 20s? Stop pretending to be a young girl. It's embarrassing for a 50-year-old hack." "Take that back. I won't tolerate insults," Charlotte snapped. "Thomas, wasn't it you who should have set her straight? What do you useless couple you are?" Jason added fuel to the fire. At this point, I couldn't keep quiet. "If you were as big as a hippo, I'd have slapped you a long time ago." Charlotte looked momentarily dumbfounded, then turned to Jason. "Did your sister just call me a hippo?" "Violet, apologize while you still can," Jason demanded. "I'll apologize when Charlotte does." "Enough, both of you," Thomas intervened. "Violet, calm down." "Fine, let's proceed with the disinheritance," Jason declared. I looked at Thomas with wide eyes, searching for reassurance, but something in his gaze told me he had a plan. Why else would he agree to such an unreasonable demand? I had no choice but to trust Thomas. "So, Jason, just to confirm, you're fine with Violet being disinherited?" Thomas asked calmly. "I've been saying that Stop making me repeat myself. It's annoying, Jason replied irritably. What an infuriating couple. A wife who acts younger than she is and a husband who thinks he's smart but is actually dumb, Charlotte sneered. Leave the money and move out already, Jason demanded. Charlotte's harsh words saddened me. Aren't we still family despite our differences? How could she say such merciless things? Why should we be the ones to leave? I couldn't agree to this. We'll find a new place soon, but we have belongings. Please give us a bit more time, I pleaded. If you take too long, I'll throw everything outside, Charlotte threatened. Try it, and I'll call the police. Think I'll be scared if you mention the police? I'm not afraid. Call the Marines if you want to arrest me, I retorted, unable to contain my anger. I stepped outside, pondering if Dad bore some responsibility. Thomas smiled knowingly at my confusion. It worked. Our plan was a success, he said, reflecting on these moments that made him thankful for our savings. With savings, you don't need to borrow money. Even with zero debt, there are substantial monthly expenses: rent, utilities, food, taxes. Taking on more debt would naturally make things tougher, Thomas explained. I've always made it a point to avoid loans, pay in full for what I buy, and save a bit each month. Years of this effort mean we won't be in a bind when emergencies happen. Maybe Jason set a bad example. He lives impulsively and turns to Dad when he's out of money. It was one thing when Dad was working, but he had no problem borrowing even after Dad retired, I added. I always tell our kids how important it is to save so they don't end up like that. Thomas and I settled into our new condo after finishing unpacking. Thomas broached the topic cautiously. Let's consult a lawyer first, to initiate the renunciation of inheritance. Are we really giving it up? He asked. That's when Thomas finally disclosed what he had almost mentioned before. While playing chess with Lawrence, he quietly mentioned that he lost all his savings and is in debt, Thomas revealed. What? Because of Jason? I gasped, shocked. Yes, that made them even more unforgivable. Maybe that couple also shortened Dad's life, Thomas conjectured. You're not entirely right, but you're close, Thomas continued, surprising me with another revelation. Charlotte had yelled loudly at Dad and pushed him with both hands from behind. It wasn't just a one-time prank. It happened multiple times. Dad started fearing it was an attempt to induce a heart attack and couldn't say anything when Jason came to borrow money. I never thought they'd go that far. In other words, Lawrence had much more debt than assets. Do you get what I'm saying? Yes, now I understand. Inheritors receive not just assets but also debt. If the debt exceeds the assets, you can renounce the inheritance. Let's ask the lawyer. That's the best course. We consulted a lawyer and successfully renounced the inheritance. Just as I suspected, Jason and his wife barged into our new condo. Violet, you set us up, didn't you? Jason accused. Set you up? What are you talking about? I replied, playing dumb. Don't play dumb. There's no inheritance from Dad, just debt. You knew, didn't you? He snapped. I had no idea. This won't end with just an arm lock. Be ready for a chokehold, I threatened, pulling out my mobile phone. Hello, is this the police? I began, but Charlotte grabbed my phone and shut it off. Violet, how are you going to take responsibility for this? She challenged. That's when Thomas stepped in. Jason, I recall asking you multiple times if it's okay to relinquish the inheritance, right? So you knew it was drowning in debt, didn't you? I had no idea, Jason muttered. Whenever Jason needed money, Lawrence would lend it without a second thought. He gave out big amounts like it was nothing. I assumed Lawrence must be well off, I explained. Jason was at a loss for words, but Charlotte interjected. Nice try, but you're not weaseling your way out of this. We inherited those debts. You two need to do something about it. What responsibility are you talking about? My spouse and I are not responsible for any of this, I retorted. Hey, are you going to do something about this or not? Threats won't work on me, Charlotte challenged. Or should we lay it all out for a third party? I'll share every detail of what happened to Jason. Are you okay with that? How would I know that Dad went into debt just to give Jason money? If I knew, I would have stopped it. Do you even realize you shortened Dad's life? Jason finally responded. Unable to respond further, Jason stayed silent, but Charlotte remained defiant. If you're going to say that, are you okay with both of you ending up in the hospital? Enough of this nonsense. If you lay a hand on me or coerce me, it's jail time, I warned Charlotte. Your threats don't work on me. You're 45 and talking like some high school delinquent. Charlotte smirked and glanced back at Thomas. Wait, were those lines aimed at me? Right after saying it, you coerced me. Coercion is a serious crime, you know. You won't get probation, idiot. Are you a judge now? It's complex to decide whether probation applies in any crime. Don't talk nonsense when you know nothing, I fired back. Seeing Charlotte's anger intensify, Thomas turned to Jason. Jason, are you okay with this? Charlotte, just shut up for a second, Jason finally said, clearly feeling the tension rise. Excuse me, who are you telling to shut up? Charlotte snapped back, her menacing glare now palpable with danger. I said, if you want to fight, do it outside. I won't allow it in my house. Let's calm down for now. As Jason stepped out into the hallway, Charlotte followed. I quickly closed the door and locked it. Their arguing voices echoed, but I was more worried about causing a disturbance in the neighborhood. Did you just tell me to shut up? What are you going to do if I call the police? Charlotte threatened. Don't worry, I'll call an ambulance in a minute, I replied calmly. A few seconds later, Jason's screams echoed down the hall. I pretended not to hear him. Shortly after, I heard what sounded like a cry of pain, but I dismissed it. Jason and Charlotte had severed ties with our family with their insults. Whether they divorced or Charlotte got arrested for assault, it was none of my concern. A few days later, I received a call from Jason. Violet, I was wrong. Will you help me? He pleaded. Who is this? I feigned ignorance. Don't be like that. We're siblings, right? He continued, his voice strained. I couldn't help but feel it was too late. It turned out Jason was in the hospital. Apparently, Charlotte had broken his arm. It felt surreal, almost like something out of a comic book. Ever heard the term you reap what you sow? I'm genuinely sorry. Could you cut me some slack? I can't afford the hospital bills, Jason begged. That's unfortunate, I replied coldly. No matter how much he pleaded, I kept my distance. Jason seemed speechless after my harsh words. Switching the call to Thomas, I ended it abruptly. Don't call him by his first name. We're no longer family, I asserted before hanging up. Thomas and I did go to the hospital, but not to visit. It was better to settle it face to face. Jason pleaded politely, please help me. Debt collectors have come to the hospital's first floor. The nurse told me I'm scared to death. Thomas looked stern. After the insults you and your spouse hurled, it's only natural for us to cut ties. That's not what I meant. If we're not cutting ties, then why renounce the inheritance? Jason looked down, his voice softening. I apologize for what I've done, but I need your help. I have no one else to turn to. What about Charlotte? Jason pleaded. We're divorced. A family falling apart, I replied somberly. Then she's at the police station for assault. It felt unreal. You repeatedly called my wife an idiot. If I had called Charlotte that, you'd never forgive me, Jason said, troubled. People who spew hate often don't remember what they've said, but those on the receiving end don't forget. I have a good memory. I remember every word you two have said. I've heard it from Charlotte as well, Thomas interjected calmly. The wife should be properly disciplined by the husband, Jason attempted to justify. What does that even mean? Explain it to me, Thomas pressed on logically. What did Charlotte mean when she said a wife should lay down her body? Is that even something you should say to a woman? Jason seemed to have forgotten not just his own comments but also those made by Charlotte. Yelling like a little puppy, that's a clear insult. As for my dear wife, you called her a young one-ape or a 50-year-old hack. Don't repeat it. Sorry, Jason muttered. Thomas didn't let up. You said it to me as well when I asked repeatedly if I should disclaim my inheritance. You told me to stop making you repeat yourself because it's annoying. It's too late for any excuses now. Jason lowered his head on the hospital bed, looking crestfallen. I'm really sorry. Can you please find it in your heart to forgive me? No way. Charlotte called my wife an old hag, and you insulted me by saying I'm not mentally sharp. By the way, what does not mentally sharp mean? Explain it to me, Thomas demanded, glaring at the trembling Jason. Jason's eyes widened with a terrified look. If I weren't in a hospital, I'd be yelling right now. Let's just cut ties off completely, Thomas declared firmly. You're the one who said to leave the money and move out quickly, I added, supporting Thomas's decision. Thomas looked down at the dejected Jason, then turned to me. Shall we go? Yes, I nodded. After all was said, I thought Thomas might end up offering financial help out of a sense of divine mercy, but he stood his ground. As we left the hospital, a smile crossed my face. I saw your scary side today. There's nothing like that. Be kind to me, okay? Thomas replied with a gentle smile. Of course, I said softly. The storm has passed. From now on, I hope for peaceful days, basking in the warmth of spring sunlight.
Hi, everyone, I'm Kira, and this is my story. Life before the pregnancy was simple and happy. Jack and I would spend evenings talking about our days. He'd share stories about his corporate challenges, and I'd tell him about the school kids' antics. But when I broke the news of the pregnancy, things took a turn I never anticipated. One evening, as Jack walked in, I was setting the table, battling waves of nausea but determined to keep things normal. "Hey, Jack, how was work today?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful. He barely looked up from his phone. Same old, Kira. Deadlines and demands. What's for dinner? I felt a pang of disappointment at his disinterest but brushed it aside. I made your favorite, spaghetti. But, I need to tell you something important. Jack finally looked up, his brow raised. What's up? You look pale. Don't tell me you're sick, we can't afford a doctor's bill right now. The concern in his voice was overshadowed by the hint of irritation. I hesitated but knew I couldn't keep it in any longer. It's not that, Jack. I'm pregnant. For a moment, there was silence. The air felt heavy. Jack's face, usually so full of confidence, went blank. Pregnant? Are you sure, Kira? His voice was a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. Yes, the tests confirmed it. We're going to have a baby, Jack. I tried to sound excited, hoping my enthusiasm would be contagious. Jack didn't respond. He just stared at the floor, lost in thought. The silence stretched between us, and I felt a cold dread settling in my stomach. This wasn't the reaction I'd hoped for. Finally, he looked up, his eyes hard. Kira, you know my job's been on the line with all the cutbacks. And now this? How are we supposed to manage with a baby? Have you thought about that? His words stung. I had imagined joy, hugs, maybe even happy tears. But instead, there was this, a cold, hard dose of reality served by the man I loved. I know, Jack, it's unexpected. But it's also a blessing, isn't it? We can make it work. Maybe I can take some extra tutoring on the side, and... Jack cut me off, his voice rising. Extra tutoring? Kira, you're not thinking straight. A baby is not just about extra expenses for a few months. It's a lifelong commitment. And with your job, how are you going to manage? I recoiled at his tone. This wasn't a discussion, it was a confrontation. My attempt to keep peace shattered like glass under the weight of his words. Jack, please, let's just talk about this calmly. We can make a plan, figure out the finances. But he was already grabbing his coat, his face a mask of frustration and anger. I need some air. We'll talk about this later, Kira. Or better yet, you figure it out. You're the one who's so happy about this blessing. And with that, he was gone, the door slamming shut behind him. I stood alone in our small kitchen, the untouched spaghetti cooling on the table, a symbol of our suddenly uncertain future. Weeks had passed since I broke the news to Jack, and each day felt like walking on thin ice. I was doing my best, trying to keep up with my teaching job despite the nausea that hit me without warning. But the day came when my body couldn't keep up, and I had to face the inevitable. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the unpaid leave form from the school in front of me, my hands trembling as I waited for Jack to come home. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet room, each second stretching into eternity. The door finally opened, and Jack walked in, his face buried in his phone. He barely glanced at me as he took off his coat. Jack, we need to talk, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, a sound of tired irritation. What is it now, Kira? I've had a day from hell at work. Can it wait? I shook my head, feeling the weight of the moment. It's about my job. I can't keep up, not with the baby and my health. I had to take unpaid leave. The words hung in the air, and I watched as Jack's expression turned from annoyance to disbelief, then to anger. Unpaid leave? Are you out of your mind, Kira? How in the hell are we supposed to manage without your salary? Did you even think about that before making this brilliant decision? His voice was rising, each word a sharp jab at my already fragile state. I tried to keep calm, to explain the situation. Jack, please understand. I'm not doing this by choice. The doctor said it's crucial for the baby's health. I'm sick all the time, I can't stand up in front of a class without feeling like I'm going to pass out. What was I supposed to do? But my words seemed to fuel his anger even more. You always have an excuse, don't you, Kira? It's always something with you. First, you bring this surprise pregnancy on me, and now this? What's next? Are you going to tell me you can't even take care of the baby once it's here? His words stung like venom, and I felt tears pricking my eyes. This wasn't the Jack I knew, the man I had married. Jack, please, you're not being fair. I'm doing the best I can. It's not like I'm sitting around, enjoying this. Do you think I like being sick, feeling weak all the time? This is hard for me too, you know. There was a moment of silence as Jack paced the room, his hands clenched into fists, his breathing heavy. You know what, Kira? I'm done. I'm done dealing with this day in, day out. You figure out how to manage your situation, but don't expect me to stand around and watch our lives go down the drain because you can't handle it. I've got my own problems to deal with. The days following our confrontation felt like moving through a thick fog. Jack's presence in the house became like a shadow, barely speaking, his face a mask of cold indifference. I missed the sound of his laughter, the warmth of his touch, but all that seemed like a distant memory now, buried under the weight of our current reality. I was sprawled on the couch, a hand on my belly, trying to find some comfort in the little life growing inside me, when Jack walked in from work. His steps were heavy, the slamming of the door louder than usual. Jack, you're home early, I said, attempting to break the ice that had formed between us. He grunted in response, tossing his keys on the table with a clatter. Yeah, well, not like there's anything better to do. Can't exactly go out with the guys knowing I've got a whole circus to deal with at home. His words were like daggers, and I felt my heart sink. Jack, I don't know what to say anymore. I'm trying here, really trying. But it's like nothing I do is right in your eyes. He let out a dry laugh, void of any humor. Right? Kira, let's not kid ourselves. You lying around all day while I bust my ass at work, that's not trying. That's you taking a vacation at my expense. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't the man I married. Vacation? You think this is a vacation for me? Being sick all the time, feeling like I'm a burden to you? This is a nightmare, Jack. I wish you could understand. Jack poured himself a drink, his back turned to me. Understand? Oh, I understand all right. I understand that I'm supposed to be the provider, the protector. But what's the point when the person you're supposed to be protecting doesn't even try to help herself? I tried to sit up, fighting the dizziness that came with the movement. Help myself? How, Jack? Tell me, because I'd love to know. I'm carrying our child, dealing with this sickness every day. What more do you want from me? He downed his drink in one go, the glass hitting the table with a thud. I want a partner, Kira. Someone who stands by me, not someone who adds to the load. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? It's always about you and your problems. Tears blurred my vision, the words choking in my throat. Jack, I'm your wife. Your partner. But it feels like I'm nothing to you now. I'm scared, Jack. Scared of what's happening to us, scared of facing this alone. For a moment, there was silence, the kind that screams louder than words. Then Jack stood up, his figure looming over me. Scared? You're not the only one, Kira. But unlike you, I don't have the luxury of breaking down. I've got to keep it together, for both of us. Because if I don't, who will? The day we had the appointment with Dr. Harris felt like walking into a storm. I knew how important it was for Jack to understand what I was going through, but his reluctance hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. As we sat in Dr. Harris's office, the doctor's gaze was kind but serious. I've asked you both here because it's crucial to understand the reality of Kira's condition. Nausea during pregnancy can be debilitating, and it's not uncommon for it to last throughout the pregnancy. Jack shifted uncomfortably in his chair, a skeptical smile on his face. Come on, Doc. Are you telling me this nausea thing is real? I mean, people go to work sick all the time. Kira's just taking it easy, right? Dr. Harris's expression didn't change. Jack, this isn't about taking it easy. Pregnancy can significantly impact a woman's body. It's not something one can simply shrug off. Kira's not pretending. This is a serious medical condition that requires support and understanding, especially from her partner. I could feel Jack's impatience growing, his disbelief a tangible force in the room. Seriously, Doc? So, what, I'm supposed to believe that she can't do a thing because of a little morning sickness? I work hard every day. It's not like I can just call in sick whenever I feel like it. Dr. Harris leaned forward, his voice firm. Jack, this isn't a little morning sickness. This is a condition that is affecting Kira's health and well-being. It's not a matter of toughness or endurance. It's a medical reality, and belittling it won't change the facts. I watched as Jack's smirk faded, replaced by a stubborn set to his jaw. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous. I don't have time for this. Kira, you're a grown woman. Stop acting like you're the only one who's ever been pregnant. Dr. Harris tried to interject, but Jack was already at the door. I'm sorry, Doc, but I'm not buying it. She's just avoiding work and chores, and now you're telling me to pamper her? That's not happening. And with that, Jack walked out, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Dr. Harris looked at me, his eyes filled with concern. Kira, I'm sorry. But please know, you're not alone in this. We'll find a way to manage your symptoms and get you the support you need. I nodded, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. The doctor's office, once a place of reassurance, now felt like the eye of the storm, with the hardest part still to come. The day of the corporate party loomed over us like a dark cloud. I felt a knot in my stomach, knowing that being around so many people, with their perfumes and the food, would be a challenge with my condition. But Jack was insistent. Kira, you have to pull yourself together for this. It's important for my job, for our future, Jack said as he adjusted his tie in front of the mirror. I was sitting on the bed, feeling weak and anxious. Jack, I really don't think I can handle it. The nausea, the smells, it's too much. Can't you go alone this time? Jack turned to me, his expression hard and unyielding. No, Kira. I won't go alone. You need to get over this nonsense and come with me. Everyone's bringing their spouses. What will they think if I show up without you? I tried to reason with him, my voice shaky. It's not nonsense, Jack. You know how bad it's been. I can't control when it hits. What if I get sick at the party? I don't want to embarrass you in front of your colleagues. He let out a harsh laugh, devoid of any real amusement. Embarrass me? Kira, you're already doing that by not going. You think people don't talk? They see you barely leave the house, hear about you not working. Now you want to add to the gossip by making me go to this party alone. The accusation stung, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. That's not fair, Jack. I'm struggling every day. This isn't about gossip, it's about my health, our baby's health. Jack's face softened for a moment, but the hardness quickly returned. Your health? What about my health, Kira? My career? You think I don't have enough on my plate? Now suck it up, get dressed, and let's go. We're already late. Feeling defeated and scared, I slowly got up and started getting ready. The drive to the party was silent, the tension between us thick enough to cut through. As we walked into the building, the noise and the smells hit me like a wave. My stomach churned, and I felt the color drain from my face. Jack was busy greeting his colleagues, a forced smile plastered on his face. Jack, I really don't feel good, I whispered, clutching his arm. He looked at me, annoyance flashing in his eyes. Not now, Kira. Just try to get through the evening. It's important for me. But it was too much. The room started spinning, and I knew I was going to be sick. I tugged at Jack's sleeve, desperation in my voice. Jack, I need to get out of here. Please. That's when it happened. Jack's grip on my arm tightened, and he pulled me away from the crowd, hissing in my ear. You just can't help yourself, can you? Always making a scene. Just go, then. Get out of here if you're going to be like this. He dragged me out into the corridor, his grip bruising my arm. I could barely stand, the nausea overwhelming me. Jack, please, I can't. But he was relentless. With a rough shove, he pushed me towards the exit. Walk home, Kira. And don't you dare come back until you've learned not to embarrass me like this. Leaning against the cool wall of the hallway, I struggled to catch my breath, the taste of humiliation and nausea bitter in my mouth. The bright lights of the party seemed a world away, and in that moment, I felt utterly alone. But then, the sound of approaching footsteps broke through my daze. Ma'am, are you all right? The voice was deep, tinged with genuine concern. I looked up to see an elderly man standing before me, his eyes searching my face for an answer. I tried to muster a response, my words tangled with sobs. I'm not okay. My husband, he just doesn't understand. The man's expression turned stern, yet his voice remained gentle. What's your husband's name, if you don't mind me asking? Between shaky breaths, I managed to utter, Jack Harrison. A flicker of recognition crossed the man's face, but he quickly masked it with a nod. I see. And why, may I ask, did he leave you out here all alone? The concern in his voice was a balm to my frayed nerves. I found myself confiding in this stranger, telling him about the pregnancy, the nausea, and how Jack had dismissed my struggles and pushed me away. The man listened intently, his jaw tightening with every word I spoke. That's no way for a man to treat his wife, especially in your condition. Jack ought to be ashamed. What kind of partner turns his back on his family when they need him most? His words, spoken with such conviction, stirred something within me, a flicker of hope, a sense of validation I hadn't felt in a long time. I don't know what to do anymore. I feel so lost, I admitted, the weight of my situation pressing down on me. The man placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, his gaze steady and reassuring. You're not alone. Not anymore. Come, let's find you a place to sit down and get some water. You need to take care of yourself, for your sake and your baby's. As we walked to a quieter area, I couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude for this kind stranger's kindness. We found a secluded table, and he brought over a glass of water, urging me to take small sips. The man then took a seat across from me, his demeanor shifting from compassionate to resolute. I'm going to have a word with Jack. It's high time someone set him straight. No one should treat their partner the way he's treated you tonight. Before I could protest, the man was on his feet, his figure exuding an authority that made me realize he was someone of significance. But more than that, he was someone who saw my pain and chose to stand by me when I felt most vulnerable. It wasn't long before the calm was shattered by a commotion coming from the main hall. Curiosity got the better of me, and I edged closer to see what was happening. There, in the center of the room, stood the elderly man, now commanding the attention of everyone. Beside him was Jack, looking like he wished the ground would swallow him whole. I could barely hear over the murmur of the crowd, but the stern voice of the older man cut through the noise. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you not just as the director of this company but as someone who believes in the core values we all hold dear. It has come to my attention that one of our own has grossly failed to uphold these values in his personal life. The room fell silent, every eye locked on the scene unfolding. Jack's face had turned an ashen color, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. The director continued, his gaze unwavering. Jack Harrison, you have not only let down this company but also the very family you vowed to protect and respect. Mocking your pregnant wife, leaving her in distress, is behavior that I cannot and will not tolerate under any circumstances. I could feel the eyes in the room shifting between Jack and the director, whispers and murmurs filling the space with a mixture of shock and disbelief. Jack finally found his voice, though it was nothing more than a weak stammer. Sir, you don't understand. Kira, she's just overreacting. She's making it all up. It's not like it sounds. The director's eyes narrowed, his disappointment clear. Overreacting? Jack, you were seen manhandling your wife, dismissing her health concerns, and leaving her alone and unwell. Is that the kind of man you are? Is that the example you set? Jack seemed to shrink with every word, his usual bravado fading into nothingness. The crowd was watching, some with open disapproval, others with whispered conversations behind their hands. Sir, please, I didn't mean for it to. I was just stressed, that's all, Jack pleaded, his voice barely audible. The director shook his head, his decision made. Stress is no excuse for your behavior, Jack. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties at this company. I will not have someone who exhibits such disregard for their family representing us in any capacity. The finality in the director's voice left no room for argument. Jack stood there, defeated and alone, as the director turned his attention to the crowd. Let this be a reminder to all of us. Our actions, both in our professional and personal lives, reflect on who we are. Let's strive to be better, to support and respect those around us. As the director stepped down, the room erupted into a low buzz of conversations. Jack made a hasty exit, his fall from grace complete. The days following the party felt surreal, like I was living in a dream, or perhaps finally waking up from a nightmare. The silence in the house was no longer suffocating, it was peaceful, a space for me to breathe and gather my thoughts. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, I watched the early morning sun paint the room with a gentle light. It was then that the doorbell rang, a sound that once would have sent a jolt of anxiety through me. But not today. Today, I felt a strange sense of calm. I opened the door to find Jack's director standing there, his face somber yet kind. Kira, may I come in? I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. Of course, please. As we sat at the table, the director folded his hands, his gaze meeting mine. I wanted to check on you, after everything that happened. And to talk about what comes next. I took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling in my heart. Thank you. It's been a lot to process. But I feel like it's time to move forward, to make some changes. The director nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. That's a good mindset to have. And you won't be alone in this. The company has a support system for situations like these. We can offer counseling, legal advice if you need it, and financial support, especially with the baby on the way. The kindness in his offer brought tears to my eyes. I don't know what to say. Thank you. This means so much to me. He offered a gentle smile. It's the least we can do. No one should go through what you've been through alone. And as for Jack, he's been given the resources to seek help too. It's up to him to decide what to do with them. I nodded, a sense of closure washing over me. Jack's path was his to choose, but mine was clear now. It was time to rebuild, to create a new life for myself and my baby. The director stood, placing a business card on the table. "If you need anything at all, you call this number. We're here for you, Kira." After he left, I looked around the quiet house, the walls echoing with the promise of a new beginning. I picked up the business card, running my fingers over the embossed letters. It was more than just a piece of paper, it was a lifeline, a symbol of hope. I took a sip of my tea, the warmth spreading through me. With the support of people who cared and the strength I had found within myself, I knew I could create a brighter future, a new dawn not just for me, but for the little life growing inside me. And as I watched the sun climb higher into the sky, I realized that this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning.
Life was as predictable as a routine dental checkup until today. My name's Jenny, your average tooth fairy who trades in molars for money, except that I work with state-of-the-art equipment in a swanky downtown clinic. My husband, Mark, is pretty much the academic type, graying at the temples and all. He lectured in the halls I once roamed as a student, though we never swapped anything more than a hello back then. It was only after my cap and gown were tucked away that we started sharing dinners, and before you knew it, vows. You could say we lived a standard married with no kids, just a couple of lazy goldfish life. Until today. Exhausted, slipping out of my work shoes, I saw them, divorce papers, as stark and chilling as an extracted wisdom tooth, lying beside a note on a coffee table that had seen better days, his handwriting, no doubt. Grimacing, I picked up the note, his words punched me in the gut harder than any root canal ever would. "Jenny, I'm tired. Tired of the humdrum, of papers, of people. I need silence, not the kind we got on Sunday mornings, but the deep kind that you only find away from civilization. Consider this my path to becoming a nobody, to finding some darn peace. Mark." My hands trembled, the note nearly crumpling in my grip. No dramatic outburst, shocked as that to you. I uncapped one of the pens that was always scattered around and scribbled on the back of some grocery receipt, the only paper in immediate reach, then dialed Mark, heart drumming a harsh beat against my ribs. The line clicked, and after what seemed like a year, his familiar, now distant voice answered. "Jenny? Mark. What's this about becoming a nobody, huh? You dumping our years together like last week's trash? Jenny, you're not getting it. I can't. I don't want to. It's not you, it's..." "Cut the crap, Mark. You leave a note? Papers? Just like that?" My voice rose as I gripped the phone like it was a lifeline. "Where are you?" There was a pause, a silence that spoke volumes. "Somewhere you can't find me. Somewhere I can be alone." Alone? And what am I supposed to do, huh? Just sit tight and smile while you play hermit? Jenny, please. No, you listen. You can't just decide you're bored, Anne. Bored isn't the word, Jenny. I need something else, something different. What? Silence? You want silence, by earplugs. But you don't just get to check out. I spat the words out as if they were sour. Jenny, please try to understand. Oh, I understand, all right. Understood loud and clear, Professor. You've made your point. Enjoy your bloody peace then. The line went dead with a finality that echoed in the now too quiet room. The note lay there, staring up at me with its life-altering news, and I was left to figure out if I was to press on with the painful extraction of Mark from my life or root around in the mess for a sliver of hope. It seemed I had more than just teeth to pull. The clinic reeked of strong antiseptic. Where it used to put me at ease, now, it just stirred the pot of my mind, brimming with gossip. Mark, my ex, gone puff, just like that. And the fact that everyone wouldn't shut up about it was getting under my skin. The phone was buzzing again. It never eased up. I knew without looking it was more of the same nosy folks prying for details. Sam's Dental, how may I help you? I answered, using the clinic's name to avoid personal questions. Hey, it's Lizzie from math department. We heard about Mark. You holding up okay? I sighed. Yeah, Lizzie, I'm doing my job. Anything else? I mean, it's just weird, right? Mark's such an urban guy. She pried, digging for dirt. It's his choice, I snapped, a bit more sharply than intended. Sorry, it's just been a rough day. I could almost hear her shrug through the phone. Sure, just checking in. You know how it is here, we're all a bit nosy. The clinic was quieter than usual. I could almost hear the whispers bleeding through the walls. Patients eyed me with a mix of pity and morbid curiosity as I walked through the hall. I needed a break from the staring and the rumors. I found myself in the staff room with Rosa, the receptionist, who was always blunt as a spoon. She was digging through her locker, the metal door screeching like nails on a chalkboard. So, he left you the papers then disappeared, huh? Rosa didn't mince her words. That's about the size of it, I muttered, pouring myself a coffee. She leaned against the lockers, arching an eyebrow. You sign M? Yeah. Savage. Rosa shook her head. Man's got style, give him that. I couldn't help but laugh, leave it to Rosa to call a disappearing act stylish. Back in my office, the nice and tidy one with diplomas on the wall, the phone rang again. It was the one face I didn't mind showing up in my caller ID, Angela, the closest thing I'd had to a sister since forever. Girl, how you just gonna let him punk you like that? No hello, no how are you, just Angela in all her glory. He didn't punk me, Ange. I signed the papers, that was my choice. And you just gonna roll over and play dead? There's nothing to fight for. I'm done and dusted with him. There was a pause, I knew Angela's wheels were turning. Fine, she said. But this isn't gonna fly. We're going out tonight. You need to blow off some steam, or you'll go nuts. I wanted to argue, but she wasn't wrong. Besides, it beat listening to the whispers and rumors that looped like a bad soundtrack in my mind. The hours ticked by, filled with teeth cleaning and dodging personal questions. By the time my last patient left, I was ready to peel out of there like a bat out of hell. Angela was waiting for me at the local dive, the kind of place where the beer was cold, and no one gave two hoots about your personal drama. I walked in and spotted her straight away, waving enthusiastically. What's kicking, chicken? She greeted me, sliding over a glass of something strong. Hey, Ange. Just the usual circus. I gulped down the drink, welcoming the burn. We talked, or rather, she talked, and I tried to forget. It worked, mostly. The clink of glasses and Angela's hearty laughter were a good combo. It was late when we said our goodbyes, just outside the bar. The night was dark, the wind was cold, and once inside my car, I realized something. I felt lighter. Like dropping off a heavy suitcase I'd been lugging around. The years had rolled by like series of silent movie frames. That old bitterness about Mark, it was more or less a faint echo these days. I mean, life had to move on, right? I shifted gears somewhere along the line, and now, well, now things were steady. You could say I was living the quiet life, except for the occasional siren wail, thanks to my new husband, Tom, the cop. Tom was good people. A chuckle in a uniform, you might say. He had this knack, you know, for turning a crappy day around with just a smirk and a joke that was so bad it circled back to being good. Then there was Joey, our little typhoon in toddler form. 3 years old and already the boss of the household. If joy came in human form, it was him, no contest. One pretty normal Tuesday, I was in the kitchen, fighting with the wrapper of a macaroni box. That's when Tom ambled in, his uniform looking like it had seen better days. He planted a kiss on my cheek, still sparking a little zing even after all these years, and ruffled Joey's hair. Hey, bud, how was your day with Mom? He asked Joey, who was smashing a toy truck into the linoleum. Joey's answer was a happy shriek and more enthusiastic truck smashing. I'm starting to think he's going to follow in your footsteps, I said, finally getting the box open and emptying it into the simmering water. Tom's beeper suddenly blared, ruining the moment. He checked it and grimaced. Looks like the station needs me. Some brawl at the bar downtown. Geez, Tom. Stay safe, will you? Always, he said, standing up but with Joey still clinging to him. He handed our son back to me. Gotta run. I'll try not to wake you too when I come back. After he left, it was just Joey and me and the hum of the refrigerator. Joey babbled something about Dada, and I couldn't help but feel a twang in my chest. Sure, I had Tom and Joey, a solid job, a roof over my head. But sometimes, when Tom's cruiser pulled out of the driveway, or when Joey's laughter filled a room, I'd remember I once had a different life, a different partner in the dance. Come on, champ, I told Joey. Let's tackle that mountain of blocks like we're the king and queen of the castle. And as I built flimsy towers for Joey to knock over, laughing all the while, I realized I'd turned over more than just a new leaf. I'd started a whole new chapter. And you know what? It looked pretty damn good from where I was sitting. As the flat screen on the wall spat out images with quiet contempt, there was Mark, my ex, hunched over on a patch of green. The grass was probably crumpled under him, matching his wrinkled linen shirt. I hadn't seen him in years, not since he traded our life for silence and dirt paths. Those journalists were eyeing him like he was a prize pig at the fair, each waiting for their turn. Mark fiddled with strands of his wild beard as he leaned into the microphone. His voice, still with that calm know-it-all tone, itched in my ears. Yeah, that's right, he was saying. I had to leave because of her. She's got this heart, steeled over, you know? Cold. And cheating? She was a regular at that game. Took my piece, she did. That's why you find me here, away from all that mess. The air in the dental clinic was colder than usual, or maybe it was just my mood darkening everything around me since that darned news report aired. I slammed my locker shut, trying to shove away the clutter of whispers and side glances that had infested the office like bad breath. It wasn't just the sterile smell of mint and disinfectant lingering, it was the stench of gossip. Thanks to my ex, Mark, I was the new plaque everyone wanted to scrape off. Hey, you done early? Gina, one of the hygienists, leaned against the door frame, balancing a stack of patient folders. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were skirting around mine, wary. Too wary. Yeah, I grunted, collecting my stuff. Need to clear my head. This place is looking kinda stuffy. She snorted, a crude sound that was music to my irritated ears. Looks the same to me. Though, you could cut the tension with dental floss. I offered a half smile, but didn't meet her eyes. Maybe some people got cavities in their personalities, I replied, voice tight. As I walked out, I couldn't shake off the prying eyes. Reaching my car, I spotted Tom waiting for me, arms crossed, leant on the hood. His usual sunny exterior was clouded over. How's it going, Jenny? He asked as I approached, trying to light up the dimming day. Like a root canal gone wrong, I replied, my keys jingled with a shake of my hand. Tom pushed himself off the car. You know what I think? Screw him. He's talking crap. That's one word for it, I said, opening the car door. Tom detoured it, his stance stubborn. We shouldn't let this nonsense get between us. You've got me, Joey, and Angela. It's their problem if they believe that liar. The sincerity in his voice was a soothing balm, but I was too riled up to take it in fully. Sure, but try telling that to the hyena club in there. He grabbed my hand, his grip firm. Listen, let's grab Joey, hit the pizza place, and just chill. All right? I took a breath, absorbing the offer. You always know how to patch things up, cop hubby, I said with a tired smile. And don't forget it. He flashed a grin, the kind that could make a dentist proud. But before we could continue, a call cut through our bubble. Mommy. Joey came sprinting across the parking lot, his babysitter trailing behind. The little guy wrapped around my legs, a toddler tornado. Hey champ, I said, lifting him up. You ready for some pizza? Pizza? Pizza, Joey chanted, any worry about the day's drama lost in his innocent cheer. I glanced back at the clinic once Joey and Tom were settled in the car, a cold laugh escaping me. To hell with them. Let's go have some real family time. Tom revved the engine, a mischievous spark lighting his eyes. No looking back, babe, that's the rule. Got it, boss? I said, and as we drove off, Joey's giggles, the only sound I cared about, I felt the heaviness shed bit by bit. It was just another crappy chapter in the novel of life, one that I'd darn well write myself. No ex-husband was going to taint my reflection, not anymore. I was still reeling from another day's work when she cornered me. Jasmine, the new intern, was kind of edgy since the day she stumbled in, but today, she was all jittery. So there I was, peeling off my gloves, and she comes up real close, smelling like antiseptic and fear. Doc, I gotta talk to you, Jasmine said, her voice as shaky as a beaten-up washing machine. What's up? I was already thinking about the pile of paperwork waiting to claw at my evening. It's about Mark. I heard the other nurses saying you were married to that guy. Her eyes darted around the room as if afraid the walls would grow ears. Yeah, what about him? I tossed the gloves and reached for my coffee, gone cold hours ago. I was a student when he was teaching. He wasn't just giving lectures, if you know what I mean. Her voice took a dive, like someone had yanked the volume down. He did stuff. Bad stuff. I felt something raw and bitter twist in my gut. Stuff? I asked, hoping for some vague rumor I could dismiss. He was handsy, you know, with me. And with others. We were just a bunch of scared kids. And he liked that power. Jasmine spat the words out like they were poison. My grip on the mug tightened. Why are you telling me this now? Because I saw him on TV, acting all holy and repentant. I couldn't stomach it. I threatened to expose him, and then he vanished. That coward, I hissed. The mug in my hand cracked, coffee seeping through the spiderweb crevices, to drip onto the floor. He told everyone he left 'cause of you and some grand spiritual quest. But that's bull. He fled 'cause I had proof of what he did. The texts, the creepy late-night calls. That's a big claim, Jasmine, I managed to say, my throat dry as sawdust. You got any of that proof on you? Yep, she said, a grim satisfaction in her tone. She hauled out her phone, a cheap thing with a cracked screen, and flicked through messages until she shoved it under my nose. There it was, in black and white. A whole sordid history laid out in texts and emails. I read, every word a punch in the gut. When I was done, I looked up. I'm sorry, for what it's worth. Thank you for coming forward. We gonna do something about it? She asked, tough as nails now. Absolutely, I said, feeling a flame of anger kindling inside me. And as we plotted revenge on the man I once called a husband, the man who had fooled us all, I felt a grim kind of satisfaction. This was going to be messy, but hell, it was about time some dirt got cleaned up around here. I stood there in the clearing, staring at the man I once called my husband. There he was, Professor Mark, looking every bit the wilderness prophet with a graying beard and a flock of adoring followers. His eyes flashed over me, a brief flash of recognition before his face settled into that infuriating calm. Jenny? What the hell are you doing here? His voice had that familiar sharp edge. Just wanted a chat, Mark. A cozy catch-up between exes. Never thought I'd find you playing guru, I said, squinting at the half-naked followers prancing around. He crossed his arms, a smirk playing on his lips. To what do I owe the pleasure? I cut to the chase. That trash talk on TV, really, Mark? Cruel and unfaithful. You sure have a way with fiction. He shrugged, the same old nonchalant shrug that drove me up the wall. Needed a story, didn't I? Playing the victim pays the bills. I couldn't help but laugh, bitter and sharp. And here I thought you ran off to find inner peace. His audience looked on, starving for some drama. He was unfazed. Gotta give the people what they want. Yeah, but at my expense? I felt that familiar anger bubbling. And there's another thing, about Jasmine. His face lost color for a second, but then he barked out a laugh. Jasmine? That kid had nothing on me. His nerve was something else. Without breaking eye contact, I slid out my phone. Actually, she did. He squinted at the screen as I flicked through the messages Jasmine had sent me. Threats, creepy come-ons, the whole 9 yards. Mark tried to grab the phone out of my hands, but then Tom appeared next to me. The message of protection couldn't have been clearer if he was wearing a flashing sign. It made me feel safe and furious all at once that I needed it. Look, everyone, Mark's voice broke through the silence, all smooth and soothing like one of those late-night radio hosts. This is all a big misunderstanding, alright? My ex here, she's got it in for me, that's all this is. I could feel my jaw clench at his words, but I kept my cool. I wasn't about to let him get to me. Not this time. Tom's voice, gravel mixed with thunder, growled next to me. Cut the crap, Mark. We all know what you did. And it's all coming out today. Mark's followers looked from him to me and back again, like they were watching a tennis match. Just then, the wail of the sirens cut through Mark's phony serenity like a chainsaw through butter. His face drained of color, which on him, looked almost impressive. Please, Mark was kneeling now, the guru luster gone, replaced by sweaty desperation. You can't do this. Think of my reputation. Tom snorted, stepping closer to Mark so that the kneeling man had to crane his neck just to keep eye contact. Reputation? What about the lies about Jenny? What about all those messages, huh? What about Jasmine's story? You think that doesn't count for nothing? The game's up, buddy. Mark looked up at us, his eyes flicking from my snarl to Tom's stony glare, and then to the uniformed officers coming up behind us. There was a moment, a single moment, where he looked like he might run. But Mark didn't run. He just sat there on his knees, looking up. Looking like he knew that the tides had indeed turned. The followers were mumbling among themselves now, backing away from their fallen idol, their murmurs building like waves before a storm. Then, one of the cops stepped forward, flipping open a notebook. Are you Professor Mark Thompson? He asked, his tone neutral. Mark just nodded, his voice squeaking like a rusty hinge. Yes, sir. The officer glanced at me, then at Tom. We're going to need to take him in, he said, as if asking for permission. Tom just gave a short nod, and I felt my heart kick up a notch. This was it. Mark shot one last desperate look at his disciples. I'm being set up, he yelled, hoping for sympathy, salvation. But seeing the truth staring back at him from the scattered glances of the crowd was the nail in the coffin of any sympathy he hoped for. The cop cuffed him with all the flair of someone clocking in for a routine shift. Mark Thompson, you are under arrest. The clink of the cuffs was like the sweetest music, and that's when I knew, for sure. The tides hadn't just turned, they'd flipped, completely. Tom wrapped his arm around me as we watched Mark being led away. The scene felt almost surreal. I turned to Tom, and his nod told me everything. We were on the same team, and we were strong. I was standing outside and breathing in the fresh air. The phone in my pocket started its own dance, buzzing with incoming calls, no doubt apologies and awkward backtracking. I had no interest in their sorry words, I told you so wasn't my style. The door to the clinic swung open, and Jasmine walked out. Hey, Doc, she said, with a grin that seemed out of place, but right for someone who'd just shrugged off a weight they'd been dragging around. Is it true? They got him? Yep, I said, feeling a sharp sense of satisfaction at her smile. It's true. Good. It's about damn time, she said, her voice firm. I could hear some of my own resolve echoed in her tone. Jasmine had courage, coming forward, speaking out. It's not easy, facing ghosts. He won't be seeing the outside of a jail cell for a long while, Tom said. Good riddance, she shot back, no hint of sympathy for my ex-husband. I couldn't help smiling at her spunk. "You did good," I said. "Really good." Tom's radio crackled with police chatter, but he ignored it, his attention on today's victory. "You gonna celebrate?" Jasmine asked. Her shift was obviously over, and she was all but bouncing on her heels, ready to let relief transition into something warmer, more joyful. "Mom's got Joey," I answered. "So, yeah, we'll celebrate." Quietly. Jasmine nodded, then left, her steps light. "Let's go home, Tom," I said after a moment. "Let's go be with our son." "Nothing I'd rather do," he agreed, and we turned away, my hand finding his, strength in our combined grip, ready to face whatever came next, together. Hey there, my name is Rose. I'm the one you don't hear about in those family photos where everyone's smiling like they don't have a care in the world. I got a sister, Lucy. She's been the star of the show since the day she was born. Little Miss Perfect, right? And me, I'm basically the backstage crew in my own life. But enough about that. So, let me paint you a picture. It's the morning of my 10th birthday. I'm at the breakfast table, thinking maybe today, things will be different. Dad's munching on his toast, buried in a newspaper. Mom's fluttering around, and Lucy's there, eyes all wide and innocent. I'm waiting for some pancakes, maybe a happy birthday, you know, the usual birthday jazz. That's when Lucy, all sweet-like, starts to cry. Through her tears, she goes, "Rose pushed me, and I hurt my knee." I'm standing there, jaw on the floor. What? No, I didn't. But Dad just peers over his paper, frowning like I'd spilled his coffee, and Mom, well, she's already knee-deep in Band-Aids for Lucy. "You gotta be kinder to your sister, Rose," Mom lectures, no room for buts. But you heard your mom, Dad cuts in. And just like that, end of story. No pancakes. Lucy's whimpering turns into a sly grin the moment they're not looking. Birthday cancelled on account of sibling drama, courtesy of yours truly. Fast forward to Christmas that year. I wake up thinking maybe this time I'll score some decent loot. We're around the tree, and Lucy's tearing through her presents like a tornado. New phone and fancy threads. I find my name on a package, rip it open. Socks. And some dollar store alarm clock. I mean, come on. Later, I'm sitting on the porch, skipping rocks on the sidewalk. Grandma Joan finds me there, hands me a cup of hot cocoa like she always does when the world gives me the cold shoulder. "Thanks, Grandma," I manage, trying not to sound as grumpy as I felt. High school was no different. Lucy had the looks, the friends, I had acne and a job at Sal's Pizzeria. Worked my tail off, got those grades, and I'm thinking, this is gonna be my ticket out, right? There's this one night, senior year, college brochures spread out on the kitchen table like a bad hand of cards. Dad's fixing the sink, Mom's doing her Sudoku, and I'm about to lay my cards down, tell them about the colleges wanting to throw scholarships my way. I'm all, there's this college outstate dash. Money's tight, Rose, Dad says straight off, not even looking up. We're looking at community options. I shoot a look at Mom for some backup. She doesn't look up from her puzzle. We're saving for your sister's college fund. That's when Grandma Joan steps in, real quiet. She talks to Dad first, then Mom. It's not pretty, but when she's done, she's got that check for me, pressed it into my hand like a secret handshake. "Make it count, kiddo," she says, eyes all fierce. And that was it. That check was my golden ticket, my ride far away from socks, alarm clocks, and Lucy's messes. Out of the circus, just like Joan said. As soon as my feet hit the campus of that outstate college, it was like I could finally breathe. No more Lucy, no more comparisons, no more feeling like an afterthought. I was my own person here, and that was all kinds of liberating. So yeah, I dug into those law books like they were the only things keeping me grounded. I was at the library more than I was at my own dorm room. Came to know every coffee stain on those tables like they were my personal constellation of caffeine. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Money was tight. I remember this one time at the campus grocery store, counting coins from my pocket for a week's worth of ramen. The cashier was tapping her nails, looking bored out of her mind. "You gonna pay or what?" she drawled, popping her gum. I was a dime short. A freaking dime. "Hold on," I mumbled, searching my pockets for a coin that wasn't there. That's when this guy behind me sighed loudly and threw a quarter on the counter. "Here, keep the change," he grunted. Embarrassing? Yeah, you bet. But it was also the day I met Mike, who turned out to be a fellow law student and a bit of a smartass. A friend, something I hadn't had a lot of. In the grind between classes and part-time jobs, Mike and I stuck together. He was as plain-spoken as they come, didn't have patience for show-offs or slackers. Wasn't the type to sugarcoat feedback on my mock trial performances either. "You gotta stop sounding like you're asking permission to be fierce," he'd say. "You know this stuff, Rose. Act like it." And I took that to heart. By the time I was sitting for the bar exam, I felt like I was carving my own path, laying down the law, you know? I wasn't Rose, Lucy's sister. I was just Rose, soon to be Rose, ESQ. At the firm, things were different. I had to prove myself again, but this time it was on my own terms. The partners, they were a mixed bag, some welcoming, some wary of the new blood. I remember being cornered by one of the senior partners, Bill, during my first week. "So, you're Joan's granddaughter," he stated more than asked, eyebrows up like he discovered gold. "Yeah, how'd you know?" I was wary, keeping my answers short and my guard up. Bill chuckled. "Joan and I fought in the same trenches once. She mailed me your resume. Said you had grit." I'd have groaned if it didn't feel like a small victory. Grandma Joan, still my one-woman fan club. In that firm, I made it known I wasn't there to ride anyone's coattails. I worked cases like they were puzzles only I could solve. In the courtroom, it was another world. I wasn't the kid sister or the overlooked daughter. I was fierce. Mike's words came back to me, about not asking for permission. "If the glove doesn't fit," I'd say, cutting through the noise, "then you must acquit." Simple, easy, nothing too fancy. To the point. It worked. So yeah, I escaped. From family expectations, from always being second best. I made it on my own terms. And it felt like freedom, hard, exhausting, but undeniably mine. It all started at the courthouse steps where I bumped into Tom, literally. Papers and apologies flying everywhere. He was there to support his buddy. I was on my first case. We laughed it off, grabbed coffee, and it turned out we could talk for hours. He was a contractor, not bothered by my legal jargon, just easygoing and genuine. Before I knew it, we were inseparable. When we decided to get married, the plan was no fuss, just us and the people we loved, sharing a good time. That plan didn't stand a chance once my family entered the picture. "It's nice," Mom would say, dabbing the corner of her eye, but her tone adding a silent "but." Dad just patted my shoulder, a silent solidarity that didn't quite warm me. And Lucy? She had to make an entrance, even if it wasn't her day. She arrived in a dress so flashy you'd think she was the one getting married. But I bit my tongue. It was my wedding day, and I wasn't gonna let her rain on my parade. At least that was the plan. Tom, he was a champ about it. Meeting my sister, he just gave me that look. Wow, she doesn't hold back, does she? I wanted to bury my head in my bouquet. You have no idea. The guests started piling in, and for a moment, it looked like it might actually be a good day. That's when Lucy decided she wasn't getting enough attention. "You're just going to ignore me? On your wedding day?" She was almost shrieking, eyes darting around hoping someone would sympathize with her. I took a deep breath, counted to 5 in my head. I was done being the peacemaker. "Lucy, not today. Please." She huffed, tossing her hair. "Whatever. I give it a year anyway." Mom shot me a warning glance, like it was my job to fix it. As usual. But something in me snapped. This was my day. Mine and Tom's. I wasn't going to let Lucy or anyone else mess with that. Get out, I repeated, and my voice didn't even shake. Lucy looked at me with wide eyes, kind of like she did when we were kids and I'd finally stand up to her nonsense. What did you just say? I'm done with your drama. This is my wedding, and you're not gonna spoil it. She sputtered, red in the face now. But I'm family. So? Family doesn't pull this kind of crap, Lucy. Not today. Not at my wedding. Mom tried to intervene. Rose, don't do this, she's just... I cut her off. No, Mom. Enough is enough. Lucy's face was a storm cloud, and she looked ready to argue. But this time she didn't. Maybe it was the way I stood, maybe it was Tom's hand in mine, or maybe it was the crowd of guests watching the drama unfold. For once, Lucy didn't have a comeback. She just turned and strutted out, heels clicking against the pavement like a judge banging a gavel. The rest of the day went by in a blur. I said I do, we kissed, and I've never felt so much like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not Lucy's shadow, not my parents' second choice, but Rose. Just Rose. And that was more than enough. Okay, so get this, a month in, post-wedding drama, and Lucy pulls a Houdini. Total ghost town where she used to be, right? Scoots out of town leaving behind nothing but a crummy note. And guess who's the villain in her sob story? Yup, yours truly. Turns out her exit strategy includes playing the blame game, and I'm it. Her note? Classic Lucy, painting her runaway act with a bunch of bull about how I've done her wrong. Like she's the fragile flower and I'm the big bad wolf. At the next family dinner, the air's so thick with tension you could cut it with a knife. Mom's at the head of the table, flinging accusatory glances my way like she's dealing cards at a high-stakes poker game. Rose, how could you let it come to this? She starts, and I can feel the showdown brewing. Dunno, Mom. Maybe 'cause I ain't the warden in Lucy's personal prison, I shoot back. I'm not in the mood for a guilt trip, that's for sure. Dad chimes in, voice laced with that don't rock the boat tone. Your sister thinks you never gave her a break. That's serious. Are you kidding me? I can feel my temper flaring, words hot on my tongue. After everything, you're gonna take her side? Based on what, a damn piece of paper? That's when Granny, sweet Granny, who always had my back, pipes up with a voice like thunder. Rose! Your sister's out there alone, scared, and it's your doing. You too, Granny? I couldn't believe my ears. Since when do you buy this load of crap? Her eyes got all misty. Your ways pushed her to it, Rose. You're not innocent. That was a gut punch. I've been looking out for her since diapers, and this is the thanks I get? The old lady was on a roll though. No excuses, girl. You've got a heart, use it. The whole clash was absurd. There we were, a family tearing into each other over Lucy's concocted tale. Even Granny, who'd never once doubted me, was singing a different tune, and boy, did it sting. I stormed out of there, the room thick with unsaid things. Granny's betrayal cut deep, but what cut deeper was knowing I'd stood up for myself. I was done being anybody's villain, especially not in Lucy's crafty escape act. If they wanted to believe her over me, that was on them. Tom's been acting off, real off. All those late nights at the office, trips out of town every other week, big projects he can't talk about. Yeah, right. Man's as subtle as a brick through a window. And then, like fate's trying to tell me something, I catch a glimpse of something red peeking out from his jacket pocket while I'm on laundry duty. A receipt for some fancy women's shop. No way was that for me. I didn't confront him. What's the point when you know you'll get nothing but half-truths topped with lies? I decided I'd do it the smart way, let someone else do the digging. Yeah, I called up a private eye, got him tasked on tailing Tom, seeing what really goes down when he's working overtime. Jimmy's the name of the PI. Seems like he's been in the game long enough to see everything twice. Just want the straight shot, I told him. No chasing ghosts. He gave me a nod that said as clear as day, I got this. So I wait. Days feel like weeks when you're waiting for a bomb to drop. I keep things normal at home, or make a damn good show of it. Every time Tom tells me he's got to work late again, I nod, smile, and say something like, don't work too hard, babe. One night, he said it again. Gotta finish up some things at the office, you know how it is. I shrug, playing it cool on the outside, but inside, my mind's racing. Sure, Tom. Don't forget to eat something. Wouldn't want you wasting away. He gives me a peck on the cheek and he's out the door, and I'm left feeling like I'm on some warped episode of a TV show where the wife's the last to know. I try focusing on a book, some cooking show, but who am I kidding? My head's not in it. Instead, I'm thinking about that receipt. That damn piece of paper that feels like it's burning a hole through the fabric of our little suburban life. Finally, I get a text. Not from Tom, but from Jimmy. My stomach drops when I see his name flash up on my phone. I don't open it. Not yet. Can't bring myself to. Whatever's in that message, it's gonna turn my world upside down. Instead, I pour myself a glass of wine, let the cool liquid settle my nerves. They say ignorance is bliss, but I passed that exit miles back. I have to look. I pick up the phone, thumb hovering over the screen, and then I press. But Jimmy's text isn't the full picture. It's just to say he's on the case, got some leads. We'll know more soon, he writes. That's it, then. No turning back now. Tom's little secrets are on borrowed time, and when the truth comes out, I'll be ready. There's something liberating about it, knowing that I'm no longer in the dark, playing the doting wife, smiling while something rotten's eating away at my marriage. Grandma Joan and I hadn't been seeing eye to eye recently, but the envelope stuffed with the PI's evidence was burning a hole in my bag and my conscience. Deep down, I knew she was the only one who could give me the straight talk I needed without sugarcoating the jagged pill I was about to swallow. I knocked on the door, and it swung open, revealing Grandma Joan with her arms folded, looking as staunch as ever. Took you long enough, she said, without a hello. I let out a breath that I had been holding in longer than I realized. Yeah, well, I'm here now. We sat down at the kitchen table, the same one we'd shared more Sunday dinners at than I could count. But today, it wasn't a warm roast that lay between us, but a file filled with photos and texts. I've got something to say, I started, but she cut me off with a sharp wave of her hand. Save it, she said. I can guess why you're here, and I don't need an apology. I narrowed my eyes, ready for a quarrel, but her face softened. What's done is done. Let's just hear what you've got. So, I spilled it, all of it. The late nights Tom pulled, the lies that didn't add up. Do you have proof? She asked, eyes piercing through me like she could see the answers scribbled across my heart. It's all here, I said, tapping the envelope. She reached out and I handed it over, but she didn't open it. Instead, she looked me straight in the eyes. You know this doesn't change anything between us, right? Family is family. That's when it hit me. Whatever had come between us, whatever words we'd exchanged that we couldn't take back, none of it mattered now. Not with this storm on the horizon. You're right, I answered. It doesn't change a thing. I still need you, Grandma. Good, she grinned, but there was a seriousness in her eyes that wasn't usually there. Because I need you too. And let me tell you, whatever's in that envelope. She tapped it and slid it back towards me. It doesn't define who you are or what you're worth. We sat there for a while, not saying much, just being together. It felt like the air had cleared. The storm clouds were still there, but now, I wasn't going to weather them alone. Later, when I went to leave, Grandma Joan gave me a tight squeeze. You call me, you hear? Day or night. We'll figure this out. I pulled back and looked at her. I will. And thanks, Grandma, for everything. As I walked away, the envelope heavy in my bag, I felt lighter somehow. My steps were more certain, my spine straighter. Whatever Tom was up to, whatever the PI had uncovered, I was ready to face it. With my grandma at my back, I felt like I could face just about anything. A month had whipped by and there we were, gathered in the stiff parlor of Grandma's house, me, Mom, Dad, and my husband, Tom. An odd quiet hung in the air as the lawyer got ready to dish out the details of the will. Just the family scene you'd expect, except for the empty spot where Grandma used to be. And then, like out of some crappy soap opera, in prances my sister, Lucy, all dolled up and smirking like she's just won the jackpot on a scratch card. Mom and Dad, tears in their eyes, fuss over her like she's just returned from war, not the two-bit runaway act she'd pulled. I stayed put, my hands clenched into fists under the table. I wasn't about to give her my piece yet. She swans up to Tom, bold as brass, and plants one on him. My Tom. As if that wasn't gag-worthy enough, she starts spouting off this garbage about how she'd cooked up this whole mess. I made it all happen that Grandma would bequeath her property to me, not to the villainous Rose. Lucy gloats, thumbing at Grandma's portrait with a grin that made my blood boil. And I also took her husband away from Rose. Mom's sobbing, Dad's face is ghost white, and there's Tom, cheek to cheek with the snake, both of them looking like they've got the secret to the universe. We have the last laugh, he says, voice slippery with that grin plastered all over his face. The room's buzzing with their confidence, them thinking they've got it all sewn up. Grandma's gone, and in their mind, her house, her savings, all her bits and bobs were theirs for the taking. They didn't see me smile. The lawyer, a guy with less flair than a wet match, starts talking. So, as per Mrs. Joan Holloway's last will and testament, the lawyer drones, and here it comes, the entirety of her estate, her home, her financial assets, and her personal effects are to be left to. I already see Lucy reaching out, like she could already touch the velvet of Grandma's antique chairs. Her granddaughter, Rose Marie Kendrick, provided. Lucy's hand hangs there, midair, and the smirks melt off her and Tom's faces faster than ice cream in July. She agrees to use these assets for the continuation of the local community garden which Mrs. Holloway was fond of. The lawyer finishes with no fanfare. The silence is thick enough to cut. Mom and Dad look between me and Lucy, their tears dry now, replaced with something else. Confusion? Betrayal? Both? Finally, I break the quiet. Well, I guess that's that, huh? Lucy's mouth zips shut, all tight lines, and Tom, he's paler than a ghost, his eyes not meeting anyone's. You wouldn't believe the circus that unfolded after the will reading. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing, distant relatives suddenly remembering my name. But me? I kept it tight. It wasn't about the drama, it was about staying 3 steps ahead. So, what's the plan now, Rose? Tom asked with that rat-like twitch of his lip, trying to sound all sweet and concerned. We were standing in Grandma's kitchen, a place where I'd shucked more corn than anyone's business. I leaned back against the counter, feeling the cool marble against my spine. Well, Tommy boy, first up, I'm changing the locks. His eyes darted like he'd been zapped. But, what about us? He stammered, like he hadn't been caught red-handed. I chuckled, low and steady. Us? Oh, darling, us jumped ship the moment you cozy up to my sis, just to get a piece of the pie. There were papers in my handbag, crisp and just waiting for his signature. Divorce papers, my ticket out of this mess. The PI snaps, the texts, the late-night calls. I had it all. My hand was stacked, and they didn't even know we were playing cards. Lucy's eyes flicked between us, sensing the shift in the air. She was like a cat that got caught sneaking a paw into the fishbowl. You can't kick him out. We have rights. Rights? I arched an eyebrow, amused at her guts. Sweetheart, after what I found out, the only right you're gonna need is the right to a good lawyer. Tom's face was pale, eyes darting to the door, probably scheming his next escape. But there was nowhere for him to run. Not this time. I felt the weight of the house keys in my pocket, the grooves grounding me. This was more than just a will, it was Grandma speaking from beyond, telling me to tidy up the trash that clung to her legacy. I walked over to Tom and handed him the papers. "Sign these, and we can at least pretend you walked away with a shred of dignity." He snatched them up, his hands shaking like he was in a snowstorm without a coat. His signature scribbled across the page was the scribble of a defeated man. Lucy was seething. "You think you've won?" she hissed, her voice a strained whisper. I smiled, genuine and clear. "Honey, this ain't about winning. This is checkmate. You played dirty, and you lost. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a garden to tend to and a life to live." With that, I left them there, in the dust of their greed, in the kitchen filled with memories of sugar cookies and laughter, a kitchen that would soon echo with new stories. No more whys, no regrets, just me, my begonias, and a fresh start. I'm Zoe, a 28-year-old librarian with a past that reads more like a thriller than a quiet bookworm's life. I grew up in a neighborhood that taught me more about survival than any school could. I became a state champion in lightweight boxing and martial arts, not just for trophies, but to stand my ground. They called me Riptide back then, 'cause I was calm until I wasn't, and then I swept everything away. I remember the day I met Alex. It started like any other, with me shelving books and daydreaming between the quiet aisles of the library. But as I left work that day, some wannabe tough guys decided I was an easy target. That's when Alex stepped in, all chivalry and bravado. "Hey, leave her alone," he shouted, stepping between me and them. I rolled my eyes, knowing well I could handle it, but I appreciated the gesture. The thugs laughed. "What are you gonna do about it?" one sneered. Before I knew it, fists were flying. Alex took a hit, and that's when I stepped in. My training kicked in, and within minutes, the thugs were running away, nursing more than their pride. Alex was on the ground, nursing a busted lip. "Wow, that was amazing," he exclaimed, blood and awe mixing in his voice. "I'm Alex, by the way." "Zoe," I replied, offering him a hand up. From that day, we were inseparable. His parents welcomed me with open arms, his mother always saying, "You're the daughter I never had." His father would chuckle, "Well, she's certainly the protector we never knew we needed." But not everyone was a fan. Mark, Alex's younger brother, was different. The first time I met him, he sneered at my job. "A librarian, huh?" he scoffed. "What do you do, read all day?" I shrugged. "And keep the world of knowledge safe for the likes of you." He laughed, a harsh sound. "I prefer my women with a bit more edge." I raised an eyebrow. "Trust me, I've got more edge than you can handle." We left it at that, an uneasy truce between us. But I could tell, this was just the beginning of our story, one that would challenge me in ways I never expected. I went home that night, the house quiet except for the sound of Alex cooking in the kitchen. The smell of spaghetti wafted through the air, a simple pleasure after a long day. "You wouldn't believe the day I had," I started, but he turned, a smile wiping away any fatigue. "Let me guess, another round with the encyclopedia set?" "Something like that," I laughed. We settled into our routine, a peaceful life punctuated by the echoes of my past. I didn't know then how much my old life would come crashing back into my new one, but for now, I was content. I had found a new beginning, a chance at a life I never thought I'd have. First Alex's father passed away, then his mother fell asleep and did not wake up. After the dust had settled with Alex's parents passing, we found ourselves navigating a new normal. They had left us a small, cozy house in a decent part of town, while Mark ended up with an apartment across the city. It seemed like things might calm down, but that was wishful thinking. I remember the day Mark showed up unannounced with his new wife, Lisa. She was a whirlwind of attitude and ink, her tattoos trailing down her arms like battle scars. I was in the middle of sorting through some old boxes when they barged in. "Hey, look what the cat dragged in," Mark announced with a smirk. Lisa stood behind him, chewing gum loudly, her eyes scanning the house like she owned the place. "Nice digs you got here." Lisa said, her voice dripping with a mix of admiration and disdain. I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans. Thanks, we like it. And you are? She laughed, a harsh, barking sound. I'm Lisa, Mark's better half. And by better, I mean way better. I couldn't help but chuckle. Well, Lisa, welcome to our home. Just try not to break anything, including Mark. Mark rolled his eyes. Always the joker, huh, Zoe? But seriously, this place is way too nice for a couple of bookworms. You should see the dump we're in. Lisa chimed in. Yeah, we were thinking, maybe we could swap, you know? You take the apartment, and we take this little paradise. Alex, who had been quiet until then, laughed. I think we'll keep what's ours, thanks. The conversation was tense, the air thick with unspoken challenges. Lisa strutted around the house, her every move calculated to intimidate. But I wasn't one to back down. Listen, Lisa, I started, my voice steady. This is our home, and you're welcome as family, but don't overstep. We all got to live our own lives. She snapped her gum and stared me down. Oh, I'm just getting started, honey. I like a challenge, and this place, she gestured around, is going to be mine. The audacity was almost laughable. Almost. I exchanged a look with Alex, who shook his head slightly, a silent message to let it go for now. They didn't stay long after that, but the tension lingered like a bad smell. After they left, Alex and I sat down in the living room, the silence between us heavy. Can you believe them? I finally said, breaking the quiet. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. Mark's always been a handful, but Lisa, she's something else. I can handle her, I said, more to myself than to him. I've dealt with worse. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, that encounter marked the beginning of a series of events that would test our patience and our resolve. Lisa's bold claim on our home wasn't just idle talk. It was a declaration of war, and we were right in the crosshairs. The trouble began in small, annoying ways at first. I'd wake up to find trash thrown over our fence or nasty words spray-painted on the side of the house. Get out, they'd say, or not welcome. It was juvenile, but it set me on edge. I had a feeling Lisa was behind it, a suspicion that was confirmed when things escalated. One morning, I found a dead bird lying on our doorstep, a twisted warning. I remember standing there, staring down at it, the anger boiling inside me. I scooped it up with a shovel, my mind racing with dark thoughts. I decided to let it slide for the moment, but then Lisa took it a step further. She came strutting into the library one afternoon, a smug look on her face. I was reshelving books, and she made a beeline straight for me. Hey, book nerd, she called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. I turned, keeping my face neutral. Can I help you? She smirked, her eyes glinting with malice. Just wanted to see where the famous Zoe spends her days. Quite the boring life you've got here, huh? I shrugged, trying to keep it cool. It's a living. What do you want, Lisa? She leaned in close, her breath reeking of cigarettes. Just a friendly visit. But let me give you a little advice. Give up the house, and all this, she gestured around, stops. Simple as that. Before I could reply, she started knocking books off the shelves, her laughter echoing in the quiet room. I grabbed her arm, stopping her. Enough, Lisa. Leave now, or I'll call the cops. She yanked her arm free, still smirking. You wouldn't dare. See you around, Zoe. I spent the next hour picking up books, my mind a whirlwind of anger and frustration. I wanted to fight back, to put her in her place, but I remembered my promise to stay calm. I couldn't let her see she got to me. That evening, I called Mark, hoping maybe he'd see reason. Mark, your wife's out of control. She came into the library today, caused a scene. It's got to stop, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause, and then he laughed. Zoe, always so dramatic. Lisa's just having a bit of fun. But I'll tell you what, you give us the house, and I'll make sure she leaves you alone. I clenched my fist, feeling the old fire rise. That's not going to happen, Mark. Control your wife, or I'll take matters into my own hands. He scoffed. Big words, Zoe. Just remember, you started this. We hung up, the threat hanging heavy in the air. I didn't tell Alex about the call, not wanting to worry him more than necessary. But I knew things were about to get a lot worse. It was only a matter of time before Lisa or Mark made their next move, and I had to be ready. The tension was like a thick fog, hanging over our home and seeping into every corner. I could feel it, a constant reminder that things were far from okay. It wasn't just the vandalism or the threats anymore. It was the waiting, the not knowing when or what would come next. One evening, as I walked home from the library, my nerves were on high alert. The streets were unusually quiet, the silence amplifying my anxiety. That's when I saw him, Mark, staggering down the sidewalk towards me, a bottle in one hand and a look of drunken fury on his face. Hey, Zoe, he slurred, his words soaked in alcohol. Thought you could ignore me, huh? I stopped, my heart pounding. Mark, go home. You're drunk. He sneered, taking a step closer. This is my family's home you're living in. You don't belong here. Before I could react, he swung at me, his fist cutting through the air. Instinct took over. I dodged his blow and grabbed his arm, twisting it behind him. He yelped in pain, his knees buckling. Listen to me, Mark, I hissed, my voice low and steady. I don't want to hurt you, but I will defend myself. He struggled, trying to break free, but I held firm. You're nothing, Zoe. A nobody. With a quick movement, I pushed him to the ground, his body hitting the pavement with a thud. He lay there, whimpering, the fight gone out of him. Stay away from us, Mark, I warned, my voice cold. Next time, I won't be so gentle. I left him there, the night, swallowing his curses and threats. As I walked the rest of the way home, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. It was one thing to deal with words and petty acts of vandalism, but this was different. Mark had crossed a line, and I knew it was only a matter of time before things escalated even further. Alex was waiting for me when I got home, his face etched with concern. Where have you been? I've been worried sick. I sighed, the weight of the evening pressing down on me. Ran into Mark. It got a little heated. Alex's eyes widened. What happened? Are you okay? I nodded, trying to reassure him. I'm fine. Just tired of all this, tired of being pushed around. He wrapped his arms around me, a silent promise of support. We'll figure this out, Zoe. Together. But as we stood there, clinging to each other, I couldn't shake the feeling that our troubles were far from over. I had reached my breaking point, and there was no turning back. I was ready to do whatever it took to protect our home, to protect our peace. And if that meant facing down the demons of my past, then so be it. I was no stranger to fighting, and I wasn't about to start backing down now. The days that followed were a blur of unease and whispered conversations. The incident with Mark had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. I knew I had to tell Alex everything, but part of me dreaded his reaction. Would he see me differently, knowing the full extent of the violence I was capable of? When Alex finally came home from his trip, I was a bundle of nerves. He looked tired, the lines on his face deeper than when he left. He dropped his bags and pulled me into a hug, a silent question in his embrace. Zoe, what's wrong? He asked, his voice laced with worry. You're shaking. I took a deep breath, the words tumbling out. It's Mark and Lisa. They've been terrorizing us, and it's getting worse. His brow furrowed, confusion and anger mixing in his eyes. What do you mean? What happened? I told him everything, from the dead bird to the confrontation with Mark. With each word, I saw the shock and hurt flash across his face. You've been dealing with this alone? Why didn't you tell me? Alex's voice cracked, a mix of anger and concern. I didn't want to worry you, and I thought I could handle it, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Zoe, we're in this together. You don't have to carry this burden alone. I nodded, the guilt and relief swirling inside me. I know. I'm sorry. I didn't want you to see this side of me. The side that fights, that hurts people. Alex took my hand, his grip firm. I married you for all of you, Zoe. Your strength, your courage, it's part of who you are. And I love you for it. We talked late into the night, making plans and discussing our options. But underneath the strategy and determination, there was an unspoken fear. What if it wasn't enough? What if Lisa and Mark didn't back down? The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Alex on the phone, his voice low and urgent. I walked into the kitchen, catching snippets of his conversation. Can't go on like this. We need to take action, he was saying. I'll call the lawyer, see what our options are. He hung up and turned to me, a determined look on his face. We're going to fight this, Zoe. Legally, and if necessary, we'll take other precautions. But we're not letting them win. I nodded, the fighter in me rising to the surface. I'm with you, Alex. Whatever it takes. But even as we banded together, ready to defend our home, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Confessing to Alex had lifted a weight off my shoulders, but it also made the threat more real. This was no longer a distant danger, it was at our doorstep, and we were about to face it head-on. The battle lines were drawn, and there was no turning back. The quiet life we had built was about to be tested, and I only hoped that our love and resolve would be enough to see us through. One brisk morning, as Alex and I were enjoying a rare moment of quiet, a loud knock shattered the peace. We exchanged a wary glance before I opened the door. There stood Mark and Lisa, flanked by a group of guys with a rough, gangster edge. Lisa's smug grin told me everything I needed to know. This was her latest attempt to intimidate us, to scare us into giving up our home. Look what we brought you, Lisa taunted, gesturing to the menacing crowd behind her. I felt Alex stiffen beside me, but I kept my cool. This isn't going to work, Lisa. You can't bully us out of our own home. That's when the unexpected happened. The apparent leader of the group, a broad-shouldered guy with a commanding presence, stepped forward and burst out laughing. It wasn't the reaction any of us were expecting, least of all me. Zoe? Is that really you? He exclaimed, his laughter subsiding into a wide grin. I squinted, taking in his features, a flicker of recognition igniting in my mind. Danny? Danny Coleman? The rest of the group looked on in confusion as Danny nodded, still grinning. In the flesh. Can't believe it's you, Riptide. The old nickname sent a shockwave through the crowd. I saw the change in their eyes, the way their posture shifted from hostile to respectful. Lisa and Mark were visibly taken aback, the confidence draining from their faces. Danny turned to the group, his voice loud and clear. Folks, you might not know this, but Zoe here is a legend. We grew up in the same neighborhood, saw her fights. Trust me when I say, she's not someone you want to mess with. The murmurs of acknowledgement and nods of respect were almost surreal. Here I was, facing a potentially dangerous situation, and suddenly I had an advocate in the most unexpected form, a former classmate turned gang leader. Danny addressed Lisa and Mark directly, his tone serious. You two got it all wrong. Trying to bully Zoe out of her house? That's not going to fly, not with me here. Lisa's voice was barely a whisper, her bravado gone. But, this is supposed to be our house. We deserve it. Danny shook his head, the finality in his motion clear. You don't deserve anything by terrorizing people, especially not someone like Zoe. He turned back to me, his expression softening. Look, I know we've had our differences in the past, but no one messes with you. Not on my watch. As they left, with Lisa and Mark trailing behind, a defeated duo, the neighborhood's silence returned. But it was a different kind of quiet now, one filled with newfound respect and an unexpected sense of security. I closed the door, leaning back against it, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away. Alex wrapped his arms around me, a mix of shock and relief on his face. I can't believe that just happened. I smiled, the tension finally releasing. Neither can I. But I'm not complaining. We had faced down a threat with the most unlikely of outcomes. As I looked out the window at the retreating figures, I realized that sometimes, the past doesn't just haunt you, it comes back to lend a helping hand. And with that thought, I knew we were going to be okay. We had stood our ground, and we had won. After the standoff with Danny and his crew, things took a swift turn. The air around our little home was charged with a sense of change, a palpable shift in the winds that had been threatening our peace for so long. The first sign of this change came unexpectedly, just a few days later. I was out in the garden, tending to the roses that had started to bloom again, when I saw Lisa, her usual brashness replaced with a hunched, defeated posture. She was alone, without Mark or any of her so-called friends. She barely glanced my way as she made her way to her car, piled with boxes and bags. It was clear, she was leaving. The news spread quickly. Danny, the unexpected ally from my past, had made good on his word. He kicked Lisa out of the gang, severing her last ties to the community she'd tried to dominate. Without the backing of her tough friends, Lisa no longer felt safe or powerful in the city. Her departure was quiet, almost unnoticed, a stark contrast to the loud, defiant character she had always portrayed. Mark was next. He came by a few days after Lisa's departure, his car filled with the last of his belongings. He stopped by our house, a hesitant figure at the end of our driveway. I went out to meet him, curious about what he had to say. "Zoe," he started, avoiding my eyes. "I'm leaving too. Sold the apartment. It's time for a fresh start, somewhere far from here." His voice was soft, lacking the harsh, mocking tone I'd grown used to. I could see the toll the recent events had taken on him, the realization of his mistakes finally dawning on him. "Mark," I said, my tone neutral, "I hope you find what you're looking for. And I hope you learn from all this." He nodded, a small acknowledgement of the chaos he'd helped create. "I'm sorry, Zoe, for all the trouble. I was wrong." With that, he got into his car and drove away, leaving behind the neighborhood, the conflicts, and a trail of regrets. The street that had once felt like a battleground was quiet again, the tumultuous chapter of our lives coming to a close. Inside, Alex and I watched from the window, a sense of surreal relief washing over us. "They're gone," I said, almost in disbelief. "Just like that." Alex wrapped his arm around my shoulder, pulling me close. "It's over," he whispered. "We can start to move on now." As we looked out at the quiet street, the setting sun casting long shadows over the houses, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected turn of fate that had led us here. The day Lisa and Mark left, the neighborhood seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. It was as if the air itself was lighter, fresher, and filled with new possibilities. Alex and I found ourselves in a surreal kind of calm, the kind you only notice once the constant noise has gone. One evening, as we sat on our front porch, the last rays of the sun dipping below the horizon, I broke the comfortable silence between us. "Can you believe it's over?" I asked, my voice a mixture of wonder and relief. Alex looked over, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "Honestly, no. It feels like we've woken up from a bad dream." I chuckled, the sound more heartfelt than it had been in months. "A really bad dream. But, hey, we're awake now." With each passing day, the dark chapter of Lisa and Mark faded more into the background. Our home felt like a sanctuary again, a place filled with love and laughter, rather than tension and fear. I returned to my routine, finding solace in the simple tasks of gardening and reading, the library a haven of quiet stability. The simple pleasures of neighborhood life, once overshadowed by fear and conflict, now shone brightly. Evening walks, chats over the fence, the shared experiences of community life, they all took on a new significance. The path had been long and fraught with challenges, but we had emerged stronger, our bonds with each other and with our community deepened. The peace that now filled our home was not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding, resilience, and love.
My name is Jody, a 32-year-old lawyer with a life that, from the outside, seems like a fairy tale. I come from a family that's pretty well off, and I've known Ethan, the guy I'm supposed to marry, since we were kids. Our dads are old buddies who used to joke about us tying the knot one day. I remember one summer evening, during one of our family's joint dinners, our fathers brought up the topic again. I was about 10, and Ethan was 13. Ethan's dad, Mr. Thompson, laughed heartily and said, "Mark my words, Ethan, one day you'll marry Jody here, and our companies will be stronger for it." My dad joined in, chuckling, "Absolutely, John. These two will unite our legacies." I remember blushing furiously. Ethan just rolled his eyes and mumbled, as if I'd ever marry a kid. Back then, I was head over heels for Ethan. But he always saw me as the annoying little girl who followed him around. Despite his attitude, I couldn't help but nurture a small hope that one day, he'd see me differently. Years passed, and we both pursued our own paths. I dived into law, and Ethan became a hotshot financier in his father's company. Our paths rarely crossed, but I always kept tabs on him, my childhood crush never really fading away. During college, our families met less frequently, but the marriage joke continued. At a Thanksgiving dinner when I was 22, Mr. Thompson nudged Ethan and said, "So, Ethan, when are you going to make an honest woman out of Jody?" Ethan, who had had a bit too much to drink, replied loudly, "Fine. If Jody isn't married by 32, and I'm still single, I'll marry her. Happy now?" Everyone laughed, but I felt a strange mix of hope and embarrassment. The thought that Ethan might one day be my husband lingered in my mind like a stubborn perfume. I dated a bit after that, but nothing serious. Part of me always compared every guy to Ethan, and they all fell short. As for Ethan, he was seen with various women over the years, never settling down. I remember the day Ethan proposed like it was yesterday. It was a typical Tuesday evening, and I had just returned from a long day at the law firm. I was exhausted, my mind still buzzing with the day's cases, when I found Ethan waiting for me at my apartment. "Hey, Jody." He greeted me casually, as if it was normal for him to be there. "Ethan? What are you doing here?" I asked, surprised. He shrugged, thought I'd drop by. "We need to talk." My heart raced. "We need to talk," those words never meant anything good in my experience. "Sure, let's talk. Is everything all right?" I tried to sound calm, but my voice betrayed a hint of nervousness. Ethan took a deep breath. "Look, you know the promise I made years ago? About marrying you if we're both still single at 32. "Yeah," I replied, a lump forming in my throat. I wasn't sure where this was going. "Well, I'm a man of my word. So, here." He pulled out a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple, yet elegant ring. "Will you marry me, Jody?" I was stunned. This wasn't the proposal I had dreamed of, but it was Ethan, and that was all that mattered. "Yes, Ethan, I will," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. He slid the ring onto my finger, and that was it. No hug, no kiss, just a nod from him. "We should tell our parents. They'll be thrilled," he said, already reaching for his phone. I nodded, still processing what had just happened. This was it. I was going to marry Ethan. The next few days were a whirlwind. Our families met for dinner to celebrate the engagement. "Ethan, I can't tell you how happy this makes me," Mr. Thompson said, clapping Ethan on the back. "Yeah, it's great," Ethan replied, his tone flat. My dad raised his glass. To Jody and Ethan, may this union bring happiness and prosperity to both our families. To Jody and Ethan, everyone echoed. The dinner was filled with laughter and plans for the future. Everyone was excited, talking about the wedding and how perfect it was for the two families to unite at last. But as I sat there, listening to them, I couldn't help but feel like a bystander in my own life. This was everything I had ever wanted, so why did it feel so hollow? But then, another part of me argued that this was Ethan, the man I had loved all my life. Maybe, with time, he would come to love me. Give it a chance, Jody, I whispered to myself. Maybe this is the start of something wonderful. I closed my eyes, trying to convince myself that everything would be all right. That this marriage, this union of two families, would somehow turn into the love story I had always dreamed of. The civil ceremony was a quiet affair, just our immediate families and a few close friends. Ethan's dad, Mr. Thompson, got teary-eyed as we exchanged vows. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said, wiping his eyes. My parents were beaming, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel a bit of happiness. After the civil ceremony, the real challenge began, planning the grand wedding. We decided on a 2-month timeline, which meant I had my work cut out for me. I dove into the preparations headfirst, hoping it would distract me from my doubts. One evening, I was sitting with a mountain of bridal magazines, trying to pick a theme for the wedding. Ethan walked in, late from work as usual. "Hey," I said, looking up. "What do you think about a vintage theme for the wedding?" Ethan glanced at the magazines and then at me. "Whatever you want, Jody. It's your day." I felt a twinge of disappointment at his indifference. "But it's our day," I protested softly. He sighed. "I'm beat, Jody. Just pick whatever you like. I'm sure it'll be great." He then walked away, leaving me alone with my magazines. I shook off the feeling of rejection and continued with the plans. Dress shopping was next on my list. I invited my mom and Ethan's mom, Mrs. Thompson, to join me. At the bridal shop, I tried on dress after dress, but nothing felt right. My mom was getting impatient. "Jody, they all look beautiful. Just pick one." Mrs. Thompson was more understanding. "Take your time, dear. It's a big decision." Finally, I found the perfect dress. It was elegant and simple, just what I had always imagined. "This is the one," I said, looking at myself in the mirror. Both moms agreed, and we celebrated with a small lunch. Mrs. Thompson brought up the topic of Ethan. "He's always been a bit reserved. Don't take it to heart, dear." I nodded, but her words didn't provide much comfort. The weeks flew by, and the wedding day was fast approaching. I was in the midst of choosing cakes and finalizing the guest list when I realized I hadn't seen much of Ethan. He was always at work or too tired to discuss anything when he was home. As the wedding day neared, I felt more like a wedding planner than a bride. My excitement was replaced by a sense of loneliness and a growing realization that maybe this marriage was more about convenience than love. But I pushed those thoughts aside. I had to focus on the wedding. Maybe, after the wedding, things would change. Maybe Ethan would be different. The day my world came crashing down started like any other. I was at work, buried under a mountain of case files, when a sudden wave of nausea hit me. I hadn't been feeling well all morning, so I decided to head home early. I pulled up to our house, noticing Ethan's car in the driveway. That was odd, he was never home this early. Quietly, I unlocked the front door, not wanting to startle him. Maybe he was sick too, I thought. As I stepped inside, I heard Ethan's voice coming from the living room. He was on the phone. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tiptoed closer. "No, baby, I can't wait to see you tonight," Ethan said, his voice soft and affectionate. My heart skipped a beat. Who was he talking to? I pressed myself against the wall, listening intently. "Yeah, marrying Jody is a pain, but it's worth it. Once I get control of the companies, we'll be set. Don't worry, After she pops out a kid, I'll dump her, he continued. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. This couldn't be happening. The room spun around me as I struggled to process his words.
Yeah.
She's clueless. Thinks I actually love her, he chuckled. That chuckle, so cold and cruel, shattered the last bit of hope I had. I couldn't listen anymore. I stumbled back to the front door, my mind racing. I needed to get out of there, to breathe. As I slammed the door shut behind me, I heard Ethan call out, "Jody, is that you?" I didn't look back. I got into my car and drove. I didn't know where I was going, I just needed to be away from that house, away from Ethan. I ended up at a park, sitting on a bench, watching families and couples around me, oblivious to my world falling apart. How could I have been so blind? How could I not see what Ethan really was? I had to make a decision. Confronting Ethan was the obvious choice, but what then? Cause a scene, break off the engagement, and be the talk of our families and friends? Or play along, keep my dignity, and figure out what to do next? As the sun set, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to let Ethan see how much he had hurt me. I would play his game, for now, but on my terms. I had to be smart about this. I drove home, my face a mask of calm. Ethan was waiting for me, a concerned look on his face. "Where were you?" "I was worried," he said, coming towards me. "I wasn't feeling well, just needed some fresh air," I lied smoothly. He nodded. "Okay, well, I'm here now. Let's have dinner." I forced a smile. "Sure, that sounds great." As we sat eating, I looked at Ethan, really looked at him. This was the man I had loved my whole life, and now, he was nothing but a stranger to me. That night, as Ethan slept beside me, I lay awake, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. One thing was clear, I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. Ethan had no idea who he was dealing with. Lying next to Ethan that night, I couldn't shake off the mix of anger and betrayal boiling inside me. I needed to know more, to understand the extent of his deceit. Quietly, I reached for his phone on the nightstand. My hands were trembling as I unlocked it, thank goodness for easy-to-guess passwords. I opened his messages and there it was, a string of texts with someone named Julia. My heart raced as I scrolled through their conversations. They were planning to meet the night before our wedding, in our house. An extreme date, in the presence of a sleeping wife, is exactly what they called their plan. So that I wouldn't disturb them, they planned to give me strong sleeping pills. The audacity of it made my blood boil. "Ethan, you bastard," I muttered under my breath. I heard him stir and quickly place the phone back, pretending to be asleep. My mind was racing with thoughts of revenge. I couldn't let them get away with this. I needed a plan, something to turn the tables on Ethan and his mistress. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had happened. Ethan was his usual self, indifferent and preoccupied with work. I kissed him,
Goodbye.
and watched him leave for the office. Once he was gone, I sat down with a cup of coffee, thinking about my next move. I decided to reach out to an old friend from law school, Mike. He was now a private investigator and could be the key to gathering the evidence I needed against Ethan. I met Mike at a small cafe downtown. He looked concerned when I told him about Ethan's betrayal. "Jody, I'm so sorry. What do you need me to do?" he asked. "I need evidence, Mike. Photos, texts, anything that can prove what he's up to," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Mike nodded. "Consider it done. I'll get you everything you need." "Thank you, Mike. I can't let him get away with this," I replied, feeling a sense of empowerment for the first time since I heard Ethan's conversation. That evening, Ethan came home late again. We sat down for dinner, the tension between us palpable. "Is everything okay, Jody? You seem distant," Ethan said, his eyes not meeting mine. I forced a smile, just tired from wedding planning. "You know how it is." He nodded.
Yeah.
"I guess." Listen, I'll be working late tomorrow night. Don't wait up for me. I felt a flash of anger but kept my composure. Sure, no problem. Work comes first, right? He didn't detect the sarcasm in my voice. Exactly. Glad you understand. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but think about how blind I had been. Ethan never loved me. It was all a lie, a means to an end for him. But I wasn't going to be a pawn in his game any longer. I had Mike gathering evidence, and soon I'd have enough to expose Ethan for the fraud he was. But that wasn't enough. I wanted him to feel the humiliation and betrayal I felt. I started planning the ultimate revenge in my mind, a way to turn the tables and leave Ethan with nothing. He thought he was playing me, but he had no idea what was coming for him. The eve of our wedding arrived with a heavy air of anticipation. Ethan seemed more on edge than usual, but I pretended not to notice. I was too focused on my plan, the final act of this tragic play. Ethan came home early, which was unusual. He was carrying a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. Thought we could celebrate our last night as an unmarried couple, he said with a forced smile. I played along, hiding my contempt. That sounds lovely, I replied, mustering a smile. As he poured the champagne, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the moment he'd try to drug me, as per his plan with Julia. We clinked glasses, and I brought the champagne to my lips, pretending to sip while actually letting it run down the side of my mouth. Ethan didn't notice, he was too busy texting under the table. Probably Julia, I thought bitterly. After a few minutes, I feigned dizziness. Ethan, I'm not feeling so well. I think I need to lie down. He looked up, satisfaction flashing in his eyes for a moment. Oh, okay. Do you need any help? No, I'll be fine. Just need some rest, I said, standing up shakily. As I made my way to the bedroom, I heard Ethan make a phone call. She's out. You can come over now, he whispered. My heart raced. This was it. My plan was about to unfold. Once in the bedroom, I quietly locked the door and slipped under the covers, pretending to be asleep. I heard the front door open and close a while later, and then low voices coming from the living room. Ethan and Julia, no doubt. I waited for what felt like hours, my body tense with anticipation. Then, I made my move. I grabbed my phone and called both our parents, whispering a quick lie about a surprise for them at the house. Mom, Dad, you need to come over right now. I have a surprise for Ethan and I want you to be part of it, I said, my voice trembling with feigned excitement. Really, honey? At this hour? Okay, we'll be right there, my mom replied, confused but intrigued. I made the same call to Ethan's parents, ensuring that everyone would arrive at the same time. Then, I sat in the dark, waiting for the moment of truth. The sound of the doorbell broke the silence of the night. I heard footsteps and then voices of confusion and anger. I slipped out of bed and made my way to the living room. The scene before me was one of chaos. Ethan and Julia, caught in a compromising position, our parents standing in the doorway, shocked and appalled. What the hell is this, Ethan? Mr. Thompson roared, his face red with anger. Ethan was speechless, his eyes wide with shock. Julia was scrambling to cover herself, looking around frantically. I stepped into the room, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. Surprise, I said, my voice cold. The confrontation was intense. Accusations flew, tears were shed, and the truth came out in the ugliest way. Ethan tried to explain, but his words fell on deaf ears. As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt a strange sense of relief. The charade was over. I was free from the lies and deceit. I watched as Ethan's world crumbled around him. He had lost everything in one fell swoop, his family, his reputation, and any future he might have had with me. The aftermath of Ethan's betrayal left the house in a haunting silence. As I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the cold coffee before me, my mind was a battleground of emotions. The dramatic revelation had left me reeling, but also ignited a flame of determination within. I spent the next few days in a flurry of activity. Meetings with my lawyer, going over the evidence Mike, the private detective, had gathered. The photos of Ethan with Julia, their intimate texts, and the damning correspondence where they planned to drug me with a powerful sleeping pill, it was all there. Ethan attempted to reach out several times, but I ignored his calls and messages. There was nothing left to say to him. On the day of the court hearing, I donned my sharpest suit, a symbol of the new, unyielding woman I had become. Walking into the courtroom, I saw Ethan, a shell of the confident man he once was. The hearing was intense. My lawyer presented the evidence with clinical precision. Ethan's lawyer tried to defend, but the proof was irrefutable. After the hearing, Ethan approached me, a look of desperation in his eyes. "Jody, please, can we talk?" he implored. I faced him, the man who had shattered my trust. "What's left to say, Ethan?" My voice was calm but laced with disdain. I'm sorry, Jody. I never thought it would go this far," he stammered. "Sorry isn't good enough." "You made your choices, Ethan," I replied, turning my back on him. Over the following months, the legal battle raged on, but my resolve never wavered. The evidence was damning, and eventually, justice was served. Ethan was ordered to pay a significant sum for emotional damages. Leaving the courtroom for the last time, a wave of relief washed over me. I had stood up to Ethan and emerged victorious. That chapter of my life was closed. I was ready to move forward, stronger and more resilient. Ethan was now a part of my past, a difficult chapter, but one that had taught me the strength I possessed. Walking out of the courthouse, the final gavel still ringing in my ears, marked more than just a legal victory. It was the end of a chapter, a painful saga that had changed me in ways I never imagined. As I stepped into the sunlight, a sense of liberation enveloped me, the chains of my past finally broken. I didn't head home immediately. Instead, I found solace in a quaint park, a place that once held memories of Ethan and me. Now, it symbolized a fresh start. Sitting on an old bench, basking in the warmth of the sun, I pondered over the recent events. My phone vibrated with a message from my friend Lisa. "You're a rock star, Jody. Ready to celebrate your freedom?" I smiled, replying, "Absolutely. Just need a moment to myself first." "Take your time, girl. We'll party when you're up for it," she responded. As I sat there, lost in thought, I was approached by an elderly woman. "You're Jody, right?" I was in the courtroom. "What you did, standing up for yourself, was incredibly brave," she said softly. Her words touched a deep chord within me. "Thank you. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary," I replied, feeling a swell of pride. "You've inspired me, dear," she said before walking away, leaving me with a sense of purpose and strength. That evening, a small celebration with close friends marked the beginning of a new era. Laughter and cheers filled the air as we toasted to new beginnings. The next day brought an unexpected turn. While out for a walk, I received a call from Ethan. His voice was desperate, a stark contrast to the confident man I once knew. "Jody, please, I need your help," he pleaded. "What's wrong, Ethan?" I asked, although I had a guess. "My father, after everything that came out, he's considering kicking me out of the company and disinheriting me. You have to talk to him, convince him not to." Ethan's voice cracked with desperation. I felt a surge of satisfaction. Karma had caught up with him. "Ethan, what you're asking? I can't do that. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences," I said calmly. "But Jody, I have nothing left. Please, I'm begging you," he implored. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of empowerment. "No, Ethan. It's time for you to face the music.
Goodbye."
I hung up, cutting off any further pleas. Walking back home, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. Ethan's downfall was a result of his own actions, and I no longer bore any responsibility for his fate. In the following weeks, I threw myself into work and rekindled old hobbies. Friends and family surrounded me, their support unwavering. Life was moving forward, and so was I. One evening, as I relaxed with a book, a realization dawned on me: I was content. The turmoil of the past had given way to peace, and for the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely happy. The journey had been tumultuous, filled with betrayal and heartache, but it had also taught me resilience and self-worth. I had stood up for myself, sought justice, and emerged stronger. My life, as I had come to know it, was nestled in a small but charming home filled with the laughter of my 2-year-old son, Leo, and the steady, reassuring presence of my husband, Michael. I was 31, a former career woman who had climbed the corporate ladder faster than most. My journey had begun in a large company, where I first met Michael. He was a junior member of my team back then, bright and ambitious, but still finding his footing. Our story was not the typical office romance. I was his superior, a fact that made our initial interactions cautious and professional. I remember the first project we worked on together. His ideas were fresh, his approach unconventional. It intrigued me. After hours, we'd often find ourselves last to leave the office, our discussions spilling over from work to life, dreams, and aspirations. It was during one of these late evenings, under the dim lights of the empty office, that our relationship took a turn. Michael, with a hesitancy that was uncharacteristic, had asked me out for coffee. "It's just coffee, as colleagues," he had said. But we both knew it was more. Fast forward through a year of discreet dates and stolen moments, we got married. It felt like a whirlwind, yet perfectly natural. Our wedding was a simple affair, just close friends and family. The highlight was when Michael, in his vows, promised not only to love and cherish me but to always respect and support my ambitions. When Leo came into our lives, everything changed. I made the decision to step away from my career to focus on our son. It wasn't an easy choice, but holding Leo for the first time, I knew it was what I wanted. Michael supported me through it all, his own career steadily advancing as he stepped into more prominent roles at work. Our home became a reflection of our new life. The walls, once lined with my various awards and accolades, now held family photos and Leo's artwork. The spare room, which was once my home office, transformed into a nursery, painted in soft pastels. Despite the joy and fulfillment motherhood brought, there were moments when I missed my career. I missed the challenges, the sense of achievement, and even the office politics. I often found myself reminiscing about my professional accomplishments, wondering what could have been if I had stayed. Michael, aware of my inner turmoil, would often encourage me to consider going back. "You were amazing at what you did, Anna. Leo's growing, and maybe it's time for you to reclaim that part of yourself," he would say. One such evening, as I was preparing dinner, Michael came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Have you thought more about going back to work?" he asked, his voice soft. I turned off the stove and leaned back into him. "I have, but I'm not sure, Michael. It's not just about me anymore. We have Leo to think about." He kissed the top of my head. "We'll figure it out together. We always do." The sun was just starting to set, casting a warm glow through the kitchen window as I prepared dinner. Leo was playing with his toys in the living room, occasionally letting out a cheerful laugh. It was a typical evening, or so I thought, until my phone rang, displaying a name I hadn't seen in a while, Mr. Thompson, my former boss. Curious, I answered, "Mr. Thompson? This is a surprise. How can I help you?" "Anna, good to hear your voice. I have a proposition for you," he said, his tone hinting at something important. "Oh, what kind of proposition?" I asked, stirring the pot on the stove. "We're looking for a new head of the department. Your name came up, and I immediately thought of you. Would you be interested in coming back?" Mr. Thompson's offer hit me like a bolt of lightning. I was momentarily speechless. I'm flattered, Mr. Thompson. But I need to think about it." "Of course, take your time. But remember, we'd love to have you back," he replied. As I hung up, my mind raced with possibilities. Returning to work, leading a department, it was a dream opportunity. But as Michael walked in, his face tired from a long day at work, I felt a pang of uncertainty. "Who was that on the phone?" Michael asked, peeling off his jacket. "It was Mr. Thompson. They want me back at work, as the head of the department," I said, trying to gauge his reaction. Michael's face hardened. "Head of the department? That's the position I've been eyeing. They promised me a shot at it." I was taken aback. "I didn't know you applied for it. Why didn't you tell me?" He sighed, frustration evident in his voice. "I didn't think it mattered. Besides, you're happy here, aren't you?" His words stung. "I am, but this is a huge opportunity for me. I can't just ignore it." Michael's expression softened slightly, but his stance was firm. "Anna, I need this promotion. It's not just about the money, it's about my career. I want you to call Mr. Thompson back and decline the offer." I felt a mix of emotions: surprise, disappointment, anger. "You want me to turn it down? Just like that?" "Yes, I do. It's important to me, Anna. Please," he pleaded. The room felt smaller as I processed his words. Michael's insistence felt like a betrayal, a dismissal of my aspirations. I realized then that our perfect life was more fragile than I had thought. The tension in the house was palpable since the phone call about the job. Michael, perhaps sensing the distance growing between us, started a new tradition, taking Leo out on weekend mornings, leaving me with a few precious hours to myself. On one such Saturday, as Michael was bundling Leo up in his little jacket, I felt a mix of relief and resentment. "You sure you want to do this every weekend? It's a lot of work, taking Leo out alone," I said, watching them by the door. Michael looked back at me, a determined look on his face. "I got this, Anna. You need a break. Besides, Leo loves our little adventures, don't you, buddy?" He ruffled Leo's hair, who giggled in response. As the door closed behind them, the house fell into a silence that felt both comforting and unsettling. I poured myself a coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the weight of my thoughts heavier than the mug in my hands. Hours later, when they returned, Michael had a victorious grin on his face. "We conquered the playground, didn't we, champ?" he said, helping Leo off with his shoes. Leo's face was flushed with excitement. "We saw a doggy, mommy. A big one." His innocent joy was infectious, and I couldn't help but smile. "That sounds wonderful, honey," I said, bending down to give Leo a hug. I looked up at Michael, trying to read his expression. "Did you have fun too?" Michael nodded, a hint of something softer in his eyes.
Yeah.
"It was good. We should do this more. It's good for him. And for us." His words, simple as they were, hit me unexpectedly. It was an olive branch, a small step towards mending the rift that had formed between us. "Maybe I could join you next time," I suggested tentatively. He paused, then nodded. "Sure, that could be nice." As I watched them play in the living room, a sense of normalcy crept back into our home. The job offer still hung over us like a dark cloud, but in these moments, it felt like we could find our way back to each other. The weekend had unfolded in its usual rhythm. Michael had taken Leo out for their Saturday morning walk, a routine that had become their special father-son time. As I settled in with a cup of tea, I remembered the smartwatch I had secretly slipped onto Leo's wrist for safety. Michael didn't know about it. I thought it was better that way, just a small measure of reassurance for me. Casually, I opened the app on my phone to check their location, expecting to see them at the nearby park as usual. But the blinking dot on the map was nowhere near the park. It was several blocks away, in a residential area unfamiliar to me. My heart raced with confusion and concern. I dialed Michael's number, trying to keep my voice calm. "Hey, where are you guys? Leo wanted to show me something he found in the park, but we can't seem to find it." There was a brief pause before Michael replied, his voice too nonchalant. "We're just at the park, near the pond. Leo's having a blast feeding the ducks." His words didn't match the GPS location. I felt a knot in my stomach. Sounds fun. See you when you get back, I said, ending the call. As I hung up, a flurry of questions invaded my thoughts. Why would Michael lie about their location? What was he hiding? I decided not to confront him about the smartwatch. I needed to know more, to understand what was happening before revealing my hand. The rest of the morning, I was restless, my mind spinning with possible explanations. When they returned home, Leo was his usual cheerful self, chattering about the ducks and the playground. Michael seemed relaxed, unaware of my inner turmoil. How was the park? I asked, watching Michael for any sign of discomfort. It was great. A bit chilly, but we had fun, didn't we, buddy? Michael responded, ruffling Leo's hair. Leo nodded eagerly, oblivious to the tension. We saw big ducks, mommy, and a doggy. I forced a smile, playing along with their tails. That sounds lovely. I'm glad you both had a good time. As the day went on, I couldn't shake off the unease. Michael's deception, however small it seemed, had planted a seed of doubt in my mind. What was he doing in that unknown neighborhood? Why lie about it? For a whole week, my mind buzzed like a beehive, disturbed and restless. Each time I glanced at Michael, a wave of questions and doubts washed over me. But I masked my turmoil, waiting for the weekend, waiting for a chance to unravel the truth behind Michael's mysterious outings with Leo. Saturday arrived with a heavy air of anticipation. Michael, as per the new routine, got ready to take Leo out. I watched them, my heart a knot of anxiety and suspicion. Have a great time, I said, forcing a smile. Where are you guys heading today? Michael, securing Leo in his stroller, looked up and replied with ease, thought we'd check out that new playground on the east side. Leo's been asking about it. After they left, I waited, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, counting the minutes. As soon as I saw their location veer off course on Leo's smartwatch app, my resolve hardened. I grabbed my keys and headed out, determined to confront whatever lay at the end of that GPS trail. Driving to the location felt surreal, like I was a character in a bad movie. The neighborhood was unfamiliar, a stark contrast to our own. I parked a block away and approached the address on foot, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was a modest, two-story building with a small, well-kept garden. Hiding my nervousness, I stood across the street, pretending to be interested in my phone. Soon, I saw them, Michael and Leo, approaching the house. The door opened, and a woman appeared. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with a bright smile. Michael pulled her to him, possessively, and they kissed. I watched, hidden behind my sunglasses. A part of me wanted to lash out at them, push them away from each other. Instead, I took out my phone and snapped a few photos, proof of the betrayal. I returned to my car, my mind a whirlwind of emotion. The drive home was a blur, each mile stretching out endlessly. Back home, the house felt emptier, even with Leo's toys scattered around. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photos on my phone. Michael, my husband, the man I trusted, was kissing another woman. The images burned in my mind, a stark, painful reality that I couldn't escape. When they returned, Michael was in high spirits, regaling me with stories of their day, the playground, the ice cream they had, Leo's laughter. I listened, nodding and smiling, a hollow feeling growing inside me. And how was the new playground? I asked, my voice steady despite the chaos inside. It was great, Michael replied, unaware of my internal turmoil. Leo made a new friend, and they played on the slides for ages. Monday morning arrived with a sense of urgency I hadn't felt in a long time. As I watched Leo play, a plan formed in my mind. It was time to reclaim a part of myself that I had put aside. Once Leo was settled with his toys, I stepped into the other room and dialed Mr. Thompson's number. My heart raced as the phone rang. Mr. Thompson, it's Anna. I've thought about your offer, and I'd like to accept the position of department head, I said, my voice steady but filled with resolve. That's fantastic news, Anna. We're thrilled to have you back on board, Mr. Thompson's voice boomed with enthusiasm. After the call, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. I had taken the first step towards a new chapter in my life, one where I wasn't just a wife and mother, but also the professional I used to be. The day passed slowly, the weight of the impending confrontation with Michael heavy on my mind. When he finally came home that evening, his mood was off. He slammed the door a bit harder than usual and threw his keys on the table. Anna, we need to talk. Why did Thompson call me today saying you took the job? The job that was supposed to be mine? His voice was laced with anger and disbelief. I took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. I did take the job, Michael. It's time for me to get back to my career. Your career? What about our agreement? What about our family? He shot back, his voice rising. Our family will be fine. This is about me, Michael. I need this. My words were firm, unyielding. Michael laughed bitterly. You need this? What about what I need? What I've been working towards? I stared at him, the betrayal and pain I had felt over the past weeks boiling to the surface. What about what you've been doing, Michael? Behind my back? His laughter stopped, replaced by a confused scowl. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I had taken. I know about her, Michael. I've seen you with her. His face paled as he looked at the photos, his anger dissolving into a mix of shock and guilt. Anna, I can't explain. No, Michael. I don't want to hear it. Not now. I cut him off, my voice shaking with emotion. You've broken our trust, and now I need to focus on myself and Leo. The decision to file for divorce, though heart-wrenching, was driven by a deep sense of betrayal and the need for justice. Armed with irrefutable evidence of Michael's infidelity, I stood my ground in the courtroom, demanding appropriate compensation and alimony. Michael fought fiercely, contesting every claim, every penny, as if trying to salvage his pride. The legal battle was draining, emotionally and mentally. But I remained resolute, bolstered by the knowledge that I was fighting not just for myself, but for a fair future for Leo and me. The court, recognizing the weight of the evidence, ruled in my favor. It was a bittersweet victory. The repercussions of our publicized divorce extended beyond the personal to the professional. The scandal of Michael's affair, once private, became a public spectacle. It wasn't long before the company we both worked for was embroiled in the controversy. Unable to weather the storm, they let Michael go. I remember the day he confronted me about it. His anger was palpable, his words sharp with blame. Are you happy now, Anna? I've lost my job because of this mess, he exclaimed, his voice tinged with bitterness. I met his gaze, my own resolve unwavering. You brought this on yourself, Michael. You made your choices, and now you're facing the consequences. He scoffed, shaking his head. I can't believe how cold you've become. You're just sitting pretty while I have to scrounge for a lesser-paying job. His words stung, but I didn't let them sway me. This isn't about revenge, Michael. It's about doing what's right. It's about justice for what you did to our family. Our relationship, post-divorce, was anything but amicable. Michael's resentment towards me only grew with each alimony payment, with every job application that led nowhere. And while I took no pleasure in his struggles, there was a part of me that felt vindicated. Justice, in its own way, had been served. Life after the divorce felt like walking on unfamiliar terrain. Each step was cautious, yet with every passing day, I grew more confident in my new role as a single mother and a professional woman reclaiming her career. One crisp morning, as I was getting Leo ready for school, he looked up at me with his big, curious eyes. Mommy, are you okay? You seem different. I knelt down to his level, brushing his hair back. I'm more than okay, Leo. I'm strong, and we're going to be just fine. He smiled, that pure, innocent smile of a child. I think you're like a superhero, Mommy. Like in my comics. I chuckled, hugging him close. Well, every superhero needs a sidekick, right? How about you be mine? Leo nodded enthusiastically, his laughter filling the room. It was moments like these that reminded me of the resilience and joy that still existed in our world, despite the shadows of the past. At work, I found myself diving into projects with a vigor I hadn't felt in years. My colleagues noticed the change too. One day, my coworker, Jenna, commented on it during lunch. "You seem different, Anna. More, I don't know, alive?" Jenna observed, stirring her coffee. I smiled, sipping my tea. "I feel like I've finally woken up, Jenna. Like I'm seeing things clearly for the first time in a long time." Jenna smiled back. "Well, it suits you. Keep it up, boss lady." Life wasn't without its challenges, though. Michael and I had minimal contact, only speaking when necessary for Leo's sake. Our conversations were brief, to the point, and often tense. On one such occasion, as we discussed Leo's upcoming parent-teacher conference, Michael's frustration was evident. "I can't make it to the meeting, Anna. I have to work," he said curtly over the phone. I took a deep breath, keeping my tone neutral. "That's fine, Michael. I'll handle it. Leo's doing great in school, by the way." There was a pause. "Thanks, Anna. Let me know if there's anything really important." As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, I found solace in the small victories and joys of everyday life. Leo's laughter, the satisfaction of a job well done, the support of friends and family, these were the things that now defined my days. I realized that moving forward wasn't about forgetting the past, but about learning from it, growing stronger because of it. It was about building a new life on my own terms, filled with hope, resilience, and the promise of new beginnings. As I looked at Leo, growing taller and more confident each day, I knew we were on the right path. Together, we were moving forward, stepping into a future that was ours to shape.
My name's Camilla, and I'm 30 years old. I live in a cozy house, a place full of memories, left to me by my dear grandmother. It's been my sanctuary, my little world, where everything just feels right. But, as life would have it, not everything outside these walls is as peaceful. You see, my family is a bit of a mixed bag. There's my husband John, a man of few words, who always seems to be caught in the middle of things. We've had our ups and downs, but who doesn't, right? Then there's my father-in-law, Robert. He was a gem, the kind of man who could light up a room with his smile. I always wondered how he ended up with Helen, my mother-in-law. To put it nicely, Helen is difficult. And that's me being polite. And let's not forget Lucy, John's sister. She lives nearby with her husband and kids in a rented apartment. Lucy and I never really clicked. Maybe it's because she's so much like Helen. I remember this one evening, a typical family dinner at our place. Robert was there, and as usual, he was the life of the party. "Camilla, this lasagna is divine," Robert said with a grin, taking another hearty bite. "Thank you, Robert. It's Grandma's recipe," I replied with a smile. Helen, on the other hand, barely touched her food. She just pushed it around her plate, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. "It's a bit too salty, don't you think?" she said, her voice sharp. John shot me an apologetic glance across the table. I just shrugged it off. "That's Helen for you, always a critic." Lucy chimed in. "Mom, it's fine. Not everyone has your taste buds." The conversation moved on, but the tension lingered, as it always did when Helen was around. After dinner, Robert pulled me aside. "Camilla, I just want to say I really appreciate how you handle Helen. You have the patience of a saint." I laughed. "Well, I try, Robert, but it's not easy." He patted my shoulder. "You're doing great, dear. Just hang in there." If only I knew then how much more hanging in there I'd have to do. That's the thing about life in our little family. You never know what's coming next, especially with Helen and Lucy in the mix. But back then, it was just the usual. A little bit of discomfort, a lot of biting my tongue and trying to keep the peace. Little did I know, the storm was just around the corner. Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. And one of those came crashing into our lives one cold, dreary morning. Robert, the one person who brought some light into our often tense family gatherings, passed away. It was sudden. A heart attack, they said. He was the glue that held us all together, and without him, things started to unravel quickly. The day after we got the news, I found myself in our kitchen, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, lost in thought. John walked in, looking like he hadn't slept a wink. "He was the best dad anyone could ask for," John said, his voice heavy with sadness. I reached out, placing my hand over his. "I know, honey. He was wonderful. We're going to miss him so much." John nodded, wiping away a tear. "Mom's taking it hard. She's a mess." That wasn't hard to imagine. Helen without Robert was like a ship without a rudder, lost and directionless. And true to form, she became more difficult than ever. Every phone call with her was like walking on eggshells. A week later, we were at Helen's house. Lucy was there too, her eyes red from crying. The air was thick with grief and unspoken tension. "We need to talk about what's next for Mom," Lucy said, breaking the uneasy silence. John sighed. "Yeah, we do. She can't be alone in that big house. She needs someone around, just in case." Helen's gaze shifted to me, her eyes narrowing. "I don't want strangers in my house. What about Camilla? She's home most of the time." I felt my heart sink. This was not what I had signed up for. "Helen, maybe you could stay with Lucy. She's got more space, and the kids would love to have you around." But Helen shook her head, her lips a thin line. "Lucy's place is always so noisy, and I can't stay in this house filled with memories of Robert." The conversation went around in circles, with no one willing to back down. Lucy seemed relieved at the thought of not having her mother move in with her. John looked torn between his mother and me, not sure which side to take. We left Helen's house that day with no resolution in sight. I could feel the storm clouds gathering, a sense of dread settling over me. How were we going to navigate this? How was I going to deal with Helen under my own roof, in the house that was once my sanctuary? As we drove home, John reached for my hand. "We'll figure this out, Camilla. Together, we will defend our independence." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But deep down, I knew things were about to get a whole lot more complicated. The air was tense when we all gathered again at Helen's house. The living room felt smaller than usual, crowded with unspoken thoughts and emotions. Lucy was there, fidgeting nervously, while her husband Mark tried to look anywhere but at Helen. John and I sat on the edge of our seats, bracing for whatever was coming. "So, have we decided what to do about Mom?" Lucy finally broke the silence. Helen, who had been staring out the window, turned sharply. "I've made up my mind," she declared. "I'm giving this house to you, Lucy, and I'm moving in with Camilla and John." My jaw dropped. "What? Helen, we didn't discuss this." Lucy's face lit up, a stark contrast to the shock on mine. "Really, Mom? That would be great." John looked at me and tried to intervene. "Mom, we need to talk about this. It's not that simple." Helen's eyes narrowed. "What's there to talk about? Camilla has plenty of space, and she works from home. It's settled." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Helen, this is a big decision. And what about Lucy? She has more room, and the kids—" Helen cut me off. "Lucy's house is always in chaos with those children. I need peace and quiet." John gave me a helpless look, clearly torn. "Camilla, maybe we can make it work. For a while, at least." So Helen hasn't changed her mind since our last meeting. I felt my frustration mounting. "John, we can't just rearrange our lives because Helen decides so. What about our privacy? Our life?" Lucy chimed in, her voice a little too eager and triumphantly. "Camilla, think about it. Mom needs us now. You wouldn't want her to be alone, would you?" I felt like I was being cornered, my own home slipping away from me. "It's not about that, Lucy. It's about making a decision that affects all of us. We need to think this through." But it was clear that Helen had made up her mind, and Lucy was all too happy to support her decision. John turned out to be too soft, not independent, to make a decision in our favor. As we left Helen's house that day, the weight of the situation settled heavily on my shoulders. I was about to lose the one place where I had always felt safe and at peace, my sanctuary, and there was nothing I could do about it. The days following that dreaded meeting were some of the longest in my life. I tried to argue with John, to make him see reason, but it was like talking to a brick wall. "Camilla, she's my mother. What do you want me to do? Turn her away?" It wasn't that I wanted to turn Helen away. I just wanted a say in what happened in my own home. But it seemed like my say didn't count for much. Before I knew it, the day came when Helen moved in. She arrived with more luggage than I thought possible for one person. My once serene living room was now cluttered with her things. "I hope you don't mind, Camilla. I need all my things around me," Helen said, directing the movers here and there. I forced a smile, hiding my frustration. "Of course, Helen. Make yourself at home." As the days turned into weeks, my patience wore thin. Helen had a way of making her presence felt in every corner of the house. She criticized my cooking, my cleaning, even the way I arranged the living room furniture. One evening, as I was trying to make dinner, Helen came into the kitchen. "You're cutting the carrots all wrong. Here, let me show you how it's done." I bit my tongue, handing her the knife. "Sure, Helen, show me." John walked in just then, and I could see he was trying to gauge the situation. "Everything okay here?" "Just teaching Camilla a thing or two about cooking," Helen said, a hint of smugness in her voice. I kept quiet, focusing on the onions I was chopping. John lingered for a moment, an awkward spectator, before mumbling something about checking the mail and leaving the kitchen. It wasn't just the constant criticism that got to me. It was the way Helen managed to turn John against me. Every time I tried to talk to him about how I felt, he accused me of being insensitive. "Camilla, she's going through a tough time. Can't you just cut her some slack?" John would say. I felt like I was losing not just my home, but my husband too. Then came the day when Helen decided she didn't like the color of the living room walls. "They're too dull. We need something brighter." I found myself reluctantly agreeing to repaint the room, just to keep the peace. As I watched the painters covering my once favorite shade of blue with a garish yellow that Helen had picked, I realized how much of my life I was giving up. My home didn't feel like mine anymore, and I wasn't sure how much more of this I could take. Living with Helen was like being on a never-ending roller coaster, except there were no thrilling moments, just a constant churning in the pit of my stomach. She had a complaint for everything. The food wasn't to her taste, the house wasn't clean enough, and the TV was never on the channel she liked. One evening, as I was trying to finish up some work on my laptop, Helen barged into the room, the TV remote in her hand. "Camilla, this TV is driving me nuts. I can't find my show." I sighed, closing my laptop. "Let me help you, Helen." As I flipped through the channels, trying to find her show, Helen muttered under her breath about how everything was better at her house. John walked in at that moment, and I looked up at him, hoping for some support. "John, can you please help your mother with the TV? I'm trying to finish my work." John frowned, looking from me to Helen. "Can't you see she's struggling, Camilla? It's just a TV show." I felt a surge of frustration. "It's not just about the TV, John. It's about having a little space to do my work, to have a moment of peace in my own house." Helen looked at John, her eyes welling up. "I didn't mean to be a burden. I just wanted to watch my show." John's expression softened as he turned to his mother. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll find your show." I watched as John took the remote from me and started channel surfing, trying to appease Helen. I felt invisible, unheard. The next day, Lucy dropped by with her kids. The house was chaotic, with the kids running around and Helen trying to dictate how to entertain them. I retreated to the kitchen to prepare some snacks, feeling overwhelmed. Lucy followed me into the kitchen, a smirk on her face. "Looks like Mom's really settled in, huh?" I didn't even try to mask my irritation. "It's a lot, Lucy. It's not easy having your entire home life turned upside down." Lucy shrugged, unconcerned. "Well, she's family. You just have to deal with it." That evening, as we all sat down for dinner, the tension was palpable. Helen criticized the pasta I made. John was silent, and Lucy's kids were restless. I finally snapped. "I can't do this anymore. I need some space, some respect in my own home." Helen gasped, and John shot me a look of disbelief. "Camilla, how can you be so selfish?" I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Selfish? I've been nothing but accommodating. This is my home too, John. The argument escalated, voices raised, words flying like daggers. John stormed out of the room, and Helen sat there, looking smug. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the muffled sounds of the TV from the living room where Helen slept, I realized something had to change. I couldn't live like this anymore. But how was I going to make John see that? How was I going to reclaim my life? The days after the big argument were filled with a tense silence. John and I barely spoke, and Helen acted like she owned the place, more so than ever. I felt like a stranger in my own home, tiptoeing around to avoid any confrontations. But the universe seemed to have other plans for me. One day, I came home early from the grocery store. The house was unusually quiet. As I was putting away the groceries, I heard hushed voices coming from the living room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tiptoed closer. It was Helen and Lucy, deep in conversation. I couldn't believe my ears when I heard what they were saying. "And now I don't have to deal with yours noisy kids all day," Helen was saying with a chuckle. Moving in with Camilla and John was the best decision. Camilla does everything around the house, and I have all the peace I want. Lucy's voice was equally gleeful. "And I get Dad's house without paying a dime. It worked out perfectly for us." My hands were shaking, and I felt a surge of anger like never before. They had been playing us all along. This wasn't about family or taking care of each other. It was a cold, calculated move. I stormed into the living room, my voice shaking with anger. "I heard everything. How could you, Helen? And you, Lucy?" Helen looked up, startled. Then her expression turned into one of defiance. "What are you talking about, Camilla? We were just chatting." Lucy tried to play innocent. "Yeah, Camilla, you must have misunderstood." But I was done being the understanding, accommodating daughter-in-law. "No, I heard you both. You've been using us, manipulating the situation for your benefit." Helen's face hardened. "You have no right to speak to me like that. I am your elder, and you should respect me." John walked in at that moment, confused. "What's going on here?" I turned to him, my eyes welling up with tears of frustration. "John, they've been using us. Your mother and sister planned all this just so they could get what they wanted." John looked from me to Helen and Lucy, his expression one of disbelief. "Is this true, Mom?" Helen started to cry, playing the victim. "She's lying, John. I would never do such a thing." John seemed torn, unsure of whom to believe. I could see the doubt in his eyes, and it broke my heart. He still didn't trust me, even after everything. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I knew things couldn't go on like this. I had to take a stand for my own sanity. The next day, I was going to have a serious talk with John. It was time to put an end to this charade, one way or another. That morning, I knew it was time for a frank conversation with John. The house was quiet, the tension from the previous night still lingering in the air. I waited in the kitchen, my thoughts racing, until John finally walked in, his face a mask of worry. "John, we need to talk about everything that's happening," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He poured himself a coffee and sat down, looking exhausted. "Camilla, I just don't know what to think anymore." "Think about us, John. Your mother and sister are tearing us apart," I urged. Before we could delve deeper, Helen walked in, her timing too perfect. "John, are you going to let her speak about your family like that?" The conversation quickly heated up. I tried to explain, to make him see the truth, but Helen's presence was like a fuse, igniting John's temper. "You're being unreasonable, Camilla. How can you be so heartless towards my mother?" John's voice rose with each word. Frustrated and desperate, I shot back, "Heartless? I'm trying to save our home, our marriage." In the heat of the moment, Helen clutched her chest dramatically, gasping, "My heart? How can you do this to me?" John spun around, his anger flaring. "Look what you're doing to her, Camilla!" And then, in a flash of fury, John's hand struck my face. The shock of it silenced the room. Helen stood there, a triumphant grin barely hidden. I touched my lip, feeling the sting of the slap and the flowing blood, and the reality of what just happened hit me. My husband had chosen his manipulative mother over me, our marriage. Without a word, I picked up the phone and called the police. As I waited for them, I began to pack Helen's and John's belongings, methodically, my movements fueled by a mix of hurt and determination. John tried to apologize, his anger now replaced with anxiety. "Camilla, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to." But it was too late. "I'm filing for divorce, John. I can't be in a marriage where I'm not respected, where I'm not safe." The police arrived, and I explained everything. John and Helen were quiet, the reality of their situation finally dawning on them. After the police left, I dragged the suitcases to the front door. Helen's face was a picture of shock as I placed them outside. "This is your stuff. You need to leave now," I said, my voice void of any emotion. John picked up the suitcases, his eyes avoiding mine. Helen wanted to scold me again, but then followed him, her triumphant act gone, replaced by a dawning realization of what she had lost. As the door closed behind them, the silence of the house enveloped me. It was a painful moment, but also one of clarity. I had stood up for myself, chosen my dignity over a broken marriage. Now, it was time to rebuild my life on my own terms, in my own home. After the divorce was finalized, I found myself in a quiet, almost surreal calm. My house, once a battleground of tension and conflict, was now solely mine again. I spent the first few days just walking through the rooms, taking in the emptiness, the peace that had returned. It felt like waking up from a long, troubled dream. I started by returning the house to its former appearance, undoing the changes Helen had imposed. Each shift, each movement, felt like a step towards reclaiming my life. The walls were repainted back to the soothing blue I loved, the furniture rearranged to the way it used to be. With each change, a sense of normalcy and tranquility returned. My new routine was simple but fulfilling. Mornings were spent in the garden, tending to the flowers that had been neglected, and evenings were for reading books in the quiet of my living room. The house, with all its memories, began to feel like a home again. One afternoon, while pruning the roses, my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, called out from over the fence. "Camilla, dear, I heard about your divorce. I'm so sorry." I smiled at her, wiping the sweat from my brow. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. It's been tough, but I'm getting there." She leaned in closer, a conspiratorial glint in her eye. "You know, I hear things haven't been so peaceful at Helen's place either. The whole neighborhood knows about their squabbles. The police have been called there a few times already." I wasn't surprised. Helen, John, Lucy, her husband, and their kids all under one roof was a recipe for constant chaos. I can imagine. Too many conflicting personalities in one space. Mrs. Jenkins shook her head. "You're better off without that drama, dear. You always were too good for them." I laughed, the sound light and free. "I'm starting to realize that now." Days turned into weeks, and I began to rediscover parts of myself that I had lost in the turmoil of my marriage. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. The strokes of the brush on the canvas were like whispers of a newfound freedom. Occasionally, I'd hear snippets of the ongoing drama at Helen's house. It was a stark reminder of the bullet I had dodged. Their house, once a symbol of familial unity, had become a pressure cooker of arguments and disagreements. In those moments, I felt a twinge of sadness for John, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of relief. I had escaped that life, that endless cycle of unhappiness. I was free to live on my terms, to find happiness in the little things, my garden, my art, my peaceful home. As I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sunset, I realized that this was a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I was the author, free to write my story, one day at a time. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, that uncertainty was exciting, filled with possibilities. I was ready to face whatever came next, on my own terms, in my own way. My name is Emma. I'm 30 years old, and I work as a financial advisor. That's where I met David, my now ex-husband. I remember that day like it was yesterday. He walked into my office with a stack of papers and a troubled look on his face. "Emma, right?" he said, offering a handshake. "I'm David Caldwell. I heard you're the best in sorting out financial messes." "That's what they say," I replied, smiling. Let's see what we can do about yours. David was tall, with short brown hair and eyes that seemed to smile even when he didn't. As I sifted through his documents, we started talking. It wasn't just about numbers and taxes. We talked about our favorite movies, music, and even debated over the best pizza in town. He had this easy way about him that made hours feel like minutes. You know, I never thought sorting my finances would be this enjoyable, David admitted as we wrapped up. Guess I have a magic touch, I joked. David laughed. Would you like to grab a coffee sometime? My treat, for making this not as painful as I expected. That coffee turned into dinner, and dinners turned into weekend getaways. We were inseparable. After 6 months, David proposed, and without a moment's hesitation, I said yes. It was a whirlwind romance, but it felt right. Our wedding was simple yet beautiful. Standing there, exchanging vows, I thought I had found my forever. David's mom, Barbara, was there too. She was a stern-looking woman, but seemed happy for us. You better give me grandkids soon, she whispered to me with a half-smile. Life as a married couple was blissful at first. David worked in real estate, and I continued at my firm. We shared dinners, movie nights, and long walks. We were a team, or so I thought. However, things began to change when the topic of children came up more frequently. It started with occasional remarks from Barbara, but soon became her constant demand. She would call and ask if I was pregnant yet, and during visits she'd say, "A grandchild would make this family complete." David always laughed it off. "Mom, give us some time," he'd say, but the pressure was building. At first, I tried to be understanding. After all, she was just an excited grandmother-to-be. But her persistence started to weigh on me. It was like our marriage wasn't enough without a child. "David, your mom needs to back off a bit," I said to him one evening. "I feel like she's more in our marriage than we are." David looked uncomfortable. "She's just excited, Emma. Let's not make a big deal out of it." As time went on, Barbara's influence in our life became more and more evident. It wasn't just about her constant nagging for grandchildren. She had opinions about everything, from how we should manage our finances to what we should eat. One Saturday morning, David and I were enjoying breakfast when his phone rang. It was Barbara. David put it on speaker, as he usually did. "David, dear, are you both eating healthy? Remember, a healthy diet is important for conceiving," she said in her usual authoritative tone. David chuckled. "Yes, Mom, we're eating healthy. Don't worry." I forced a smile, but inside I was screaming. It felt like she was monitoring our every move. Things got more intense when Barbara started visiting us more frequently. One evening, she came over unannounced, carrying a stack of parenting books. "Emma, you should start reading these. It's never too early to prepare," she said, dumping the books on the coffee table. I glanced at David, hoping he would say something, but he just shrugged. "Thanks, Barbara. We'll look into them," I said, trying to sound grateful. Her visits became a regular occurrence. It was like she was keeping tabs on us, making sure we were doing everything right to have a child. And every time she brought up the topic, David would just nod and agree with her. One night, after another of Barbara's visits, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "David, we need to talk," I said, frustration evident in my voice. "What's up?" he asked, not looking up from the TV. "It's your mom. She's suffocating us with this baby talk. We barely have time to be a couple without her interference," I said. David finally looked at me. "She's just excited, Emma. She means well." "Excited or obsessed?" I countered. "It feels like she's the third person in our marriage." David sighed. "She's my mom. What do you want me to do? Tell her to stop caring?" "It's not about caring, David. It's about respecting our space, our decisions. Can't you see that?" David didn't respond. He just turned back to the TV, and that was the end of our conversation. But it wasn't the end of the issue. If anything, it only got worse. Barbara's visits became more frequent and her comments more intrusive. "You two should go on a vacation. Just relax. It'll help with conception," she suggested one day. "Maybe Emma should quit her job, reduce the stress," she said on another occasion. It felt like she was dictating our life, and David was letting her. I started feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. The love and understanding that had once bonded David and me seemed to be slipping away, lost in the shadow of Barbara's overbearing presence. The constant pressure about having a baby started to take its toll on both of us. David and I were arguing more often, and the romance that once filled our home seemed to have evaporated. Still, amidst all this, I held on to the hope that things would get better, that we'd find our way back to each other. But then came the day that changed everything. David came home late one evening, looking more downcast than usual. I was in the kitchen, trying to fix us a quick dinner. "David, is everything okay?" I asked, concerned. He slumped into a chair at the kitchen table, burying his face in his hands. "We need to talk, Emma." That tone in his voice sent a chill down my spine. I sat across from him, my heart pounding. "It's about us. Trying to have a baby," he started, not meeting my eyes. "What about it?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "We went to the doctor, remember? For those tests?" he said, finally looking up at me. I nodded. A few weeks ago, we had gone for a fertility checkup, hoping it would put Barbara's nagging to rest. David took a deep breath. "The results came in today. It's not you, Emma. It's me." I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and confusion. "What do you mean?" "The doctor said I have a low sperm count. It's unlikely that I can father a child," he said, his voice breaking. I reached for his hand, trying to offer some comfort. "David, it's okay. We can figure this out together. Maybe there's treatment or other options." He pulled his hand away, shaking his head. "No, you don't understand. I won't go through any treatment. It's just not something I can do." I was stunned. "But why? If there's a chance." "It's my decision, Emma. I just can't," he said firmly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I loved, who always seemed so strong and confident, was giving up without even trying. "David, please, don't let this come between us. We can work through it," I pleaded. He stood up, avoiding my gaze. "I need some time alone to think about all this." And just like that, he walked out of the kitchen, leaving me sitting there, trying to process it all. I couldn't understand why he wouldn't even consider treatment. Was his pride more important than our chance to have a family? The next few days were like walking on eggshells. David barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was short and cold. I felt a growing distance between us, a crack in the foundation of our marriage that seemed to be widening with each passing day. Then came the day that turned the crack into a gaping hole. David had been out late again. I was in bed, pretending to be asleep when he came in. He thought I was asleep and started talking to someone on the phone. "Yes, Mom, I got the results. It's not good." "No, I don't want treatment." "I know, but I can't." "Yes, I'll figure something out." Hearing him talk to his mom about something so personal, something he barely discussed with me, felt like a betrayal. It was clear that Barbara's shadow loomed larger over our marriage than I had ever realized. I lay there in the dark, tears streaming down my face, feeling utterly alone. Our marriage was crumbling, and I didn't know how to save it. Life at home had become unbearable. David and I were like strangers, living under the same roof. The love and warmth that once defined our relationship seemed like a distant memory. But just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, life threw me a curveball. I had been feeling under the weather for a few days. At first, I thought it was just stress. But then I missed my period. A part of me was scared to even entertain the thought, but I knew I had to find out. So, one morning, I bought a pregnancy test. Sitting in the bathroom, waiting for the result felt like the longest few minutes of my life. And then, there it was. A positive result. I was pregnant. For a moment, I was in disbelief. After all the talk about David's infertility, this felt like a miracle. A ray of hope in the midst of our crumbling marriage. But how would David react? I decided to tell him that evening. He came home late, as usual, and barely acknowledged me. I took a deep breath and approached him. "David, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. He looked up, his expression weary. "What is it now, Emma?" "I'm pregnant," I blurted out. For a moment, there was silence. Then he laughed, a bitter, cynical laugh. "Pregnant? How? According to the doctors, I can't." "I don't know, but the test is positive." We're going to have a baby, I said, tears welling up in my eyes. He stood up abruptly, anger flashing in his eyes. This is some kind of joke, right? You're trying to trap me? I was shocked. Trap you? David, I'm telling you we're going to have a baby. Our baby. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. No, this can't be. You must have cheated. That's it, isn't it? You cheated on me. I felt like I had been slapped. Cheated? How can you even say that? I've been nothing but faithful to you. He wasn't listening. He was too consumed by his own rage and disbelief. Get out. I want you out of this house, he yelled. David, please, let's talk about this. We can go to the doctor, get a confirmation, I pleaded. But it was like talking to a wall. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. That night, I slept in the guest room, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. The next day, David was gone before I woke up. His mother, Barbara, showed up instead. The look on her face was a mix of anger and disgust. You should be ashamed of yourself, Emma. Trapping my son with another man's child, she spat. I didn't cheat on David. This child is his. I defended myself. She laughed, a cold, mocking laugh. Do you take me for a fool? My son can't have children. You're just a gold digger, trying to secure your future. I was stunned by her cruelty. This is David's child. I've never been with anyone else. She moved closer, her voice venomous. You have 1 week to pack your things and leave. And don't even think about asking for alimony or child support. You won't get a dime from us. The ultimatum from Barbara was the last straw. I knew I couldn't continue living in a house filled with resentment and accusations. It was time to take control of my life, for my sake and for the baby's. First things first, I filed for divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. David and his mother tried to make it difficult. They wanted a piece of everything I had, claiming it was their right. But I had a strong case. Everything I owned, all my savings and property, were mine long before David entered my life. Their attempts to grab what wasn't theirs failed miserably. As for alimony, I didn't ask for a penny. I wanted no financial ties to David. No reason for him or his mother to interfere in my life again. I was determined to start anew, free from their toxicity. I found a modest apartment, not too fancy, but cozy enough to be a fresh start. Packing up my things from the house was bittersweet. Every photo, every piece of furniture had a memory attached to it, but I was ready to leave them behind. The day I moved out, David was conspicuously absent. Maybe he couldn't face me, or perhaps he just didn't care. Either way, it didn't matter. I left the keys on the counter and closed that chapter of my life. The first few nights in my new apartment were the hardest. The silence was overwhelming, and the reality of my situation often brought me to tears. But I found solace in the little life growing inside me. Talking to my unborn child became a nightly ritual, filling the emptiness with hope and love. Gradually, life in my new apartment started to feel less like a refuge and more like a home. I found comfort in my routine, and the bond with my unborn child grew stronger each day. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some old things, I found a photo of David and me from happier times. A pang of sadness hit me, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of relief. That chapter of my life was over. Then my phone rang. It was David. Emma, I've received the divorce papers, he said, his voice emotionless. I'm glad they reached you. Please take care of the formalities, I responded calmly. There was a pause before he added, I won't bother you about the baby. You won't hear from me again. It was a cold goodbye, but it was closure. As I hung up, I realized that in my solitude, I had found an inner strength I never knew I had. I was ready to face the future, not as David's estranged wife, but as a strong, independent woman and a loving mother. It was a quiet evening, and I was sitting on the couch, browsing through a magazine while Jacob, my 4-year-old son, played with his toys on the floor. The peace was interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. Puzzled, I went to answer it, wondering who it could be at this hour. Standing there was a woman I barely recognized, but her eyes held a familiar sorrow. Hi, Emma. It's been a long time, she said hesitantly. It took me a moment, but then I recognized her as Linda, a friend I had known through my ex-husband. Linda, yes, it has been. What brings you here? She shifted uncomfortably, looking past me at Jacob, who was now peeking around my legs. "I thought you should know about David." David. Just hearing his name after all these years sent a chill down my spine. "What about him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Linda sighed. "He's not doing well, Emma. After you left, things went downhill for him. He became an alcoholic. He remarried a few years ago and had a child, but the boy was born with disabilities. David couldn't handle it. He left them, divorced his wife, and now he's refusing to pay child support. He's in legal trouble." The news hit me hard, but not in the way Linda might have expected. I felt a deep sadness, not for David, but for his child and the woman he had left behind. "That's terrible," I said softly. Linda nodded. "I thought you should know. Given your past with him." I appreciated her concern, but knew I had to set boundaries. "Thank you for telling me, Linda, but that part of my life is over. David made his choices, and they have nothing to do with me or my son." Linda looked at Jacob, then back at me. "I understand, Emma. I just thought—" I smiled, albeit a little sadly. "I appreciate it, Linda, but my focus is on Jacob and our life now. What David does or doesn't do isn't my concern anymore." She nodded, seemingly understanding. "I hope you and Jacob are happy, Emma. You both deserve it." "Thank you, we are." I glanced at Jacob, who was now fully engrossed in his toys again. "And I intend to keep it that way." After Linda left, I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, taking deep breaths. The past had a way of sneaking up on you, but I was determined not to let it overshadow the life I had built for myself and my son. The park was vibrant that day, with laughter and the sounds of children playing. I was there with Jacob, my heart swelling with pride as I watched him run around. Then, a familiar, unwelcome voice sliced through the air. "Emma, is that you?" I turned, my heart sinking. Barbara, my former mother-in-law, was approaching, her eyes fixed on Jacob. "Barbara?" I said coolly. "What are you doing here?" Ignoring my tone, her gaze was locked on Jacob. "He's grown so much. He's your son, right?" "Yes, this is Jacob," I answered, moving subtly to stand between her and my son. Barbara's eyes sparkled with a disturbing kind of eagerness. "I was hoping to see him. After all, he's my grandson." I felt a wave of anger. "And why would you want to see him?" "Well, you know, my other grandson." She trailed off, her face twisting. "He's not... well, he's sick. It's just not the same. I want to be part of a healthy grandchild's life." Her words struck me like a slap. The contempt in her voice for her own grandchild was appalling. "Barbara," I said, my voice steely, "you have no right to be part of Jacob's life. Not after everything that happened." "But Emma, that was all David's doing," she protested. I shook my head. "You supported him. You turned against me when I was carrying your grandchild. And now you speak with such disgust about your other grandson just because he's sick. That's unforgivable." Barbara's face reddened. "You can't keep me away from my grandson." "I can, and I will," I declared firmly. "Jacob doesn't need someone in his life who values people based on their health. He will not be part of your twisted view of family." She looked like she was about to argue, but I cut her off. "This conversation is over. Stay away from us, Barbara. Your presence is neither wanted nor welcomed." I took Jacob's hand and walked away, leaving Barbara standing alone, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. As we walked, Jacob looked up at me, his innocent eyes filled with questions. "Mommy, who was that lady?" "That was someone we used to know, sweetheart," I replied gently, "but she's not part of our lives anymore." Sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with warm colors, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Jacob was inside, his laughter echoing as he played. Life had settled into a calm rhythm, the storms of the past now distant memories. "Mom, look what I made." Jacob's voice pulled me back from my thoughts. He came running out, holding a drawing in his hands. It was a picture of the two of us, smiling under a big, bright sun. "It's beautiful, Jacob," I said, pulling him into a hug. "You're quite the artist." He beamed with pride. "I want to put it on the fridge." "Let's do that," I smiled, following him inside. As we walked, I thought about how far we'd come. There was a time when the weight of the past felt crushing, but now it seemed like a distant echo. Later that evening, after Jacob was asleep, I sat down with a cup of tea, reflecting on everything. The phone rang, disrupting the quiet. I hesitated but decided to answer it. Hello? It was my sister Anna. Hey Emma, I just wanted to check in. How are you and Jacob doing? We're doing well, Anna. Jacob's growing up so fast, I replied, a smile in my voice. I heard about your run-in with Barbara. Are you okay? She asked, concern lacing her words. I sighed. Yeah, it was unexpected, but I'm okay. It's just a reminder of the past. I know it's tough, but you've come so far, Emma. You're strong, and you've built a wonderful life for you and Jacob, she said encouragingly. Her words warmed my heart. Thanks, Anna. It means a lot. We talked for a while longer, about small things, everyday life. It was comforting, this connection with my sister, a reminder of the support system I had. After hanging up, I went to the living room where Jacob's drawing was displayed on the fridge. Looking at it, I realized how much we had both grown. The pain and anger of the past had faded, leaving room for healing and new beginnings. I walked to Jacob's room, watching him sleep peacefully. Leaning down, I kissed his forehead gently. "Good night, my little artist," I whispered. Back on the porch, I gazed at the stars emerging in the night sky. The echoes of the past were fading, their hold on me loosening. In their place was hope, a quiet strength, and the unconditional love between a mother and her son.